Hey, what is up, everyone? I hope you guys are doing well. Today we got a unique story narrated by my friend Frederick. I hope you guys enjoy it and watch till the end, guys.
In the grim darkness of the far future, there are forces that defy comprehension. Entities so vast and terrible that their very existence warps reality itself. These are the chaos gods, the ruinous powers, beings of pure psychic energy that dwell in the hellish dimension known as the warp. They are worshipped as gods by countless millions across the galaxy, feared even by the mightiest warriors of humanity's Adeptus Astartes, and their influence touches every corner of the material universe. But here is a truth that few dare to speak, a secret whispered only in the most forbidden texts, and by the bravest or most foolish of scholars. The chaos gods know fear. These entities, who inspire terror in the hearts of billions, who corrupt entire worlds with but a thought, who command legions of demons beyond counting. They too have their vulnerabilities. They too face threats that challenge their very existence. And understanding what the Chaos Gods fear reveals not just their weaknesses, but the fundamental nature of the eternal war that rages across the galaxy. To understand what threatens the Dark Gods, we must first understand what they are. The Chaos Gods are not truly divine beings in any traditional sense, despite the fervent worship they receive from their followers. They are psychic constructs, vast accumulations of emotion and thought, given sentience and terrible purpose. Each one embodies a specific aspect of mortal psychology, taken to its most extreme and terrible conclusion. They exist in the Imperium, that realm of pure psychic energy that underlies all physical reality, feeding on the emotions of every sentient being in the material universe. Horn, the blood god, is rage and violence personified. Every act of murder, every battlefield death, every moment of hatred and fury across the galaxy feeds his power. He sits upon a throne of brass built atop a mountain of skulls, each one representing a life ended in violence. His nature is direct, brutal, and utterly without mercy. He cares not from whence the blood flows, only that it does flow in torrents across the galaxy. Tzeentch, the changer of ways, embodies ambition, hope, and the desire for knowledge, particularly forbidden knowledge. He is the architect of fate, weaving plots within plots, schemes so complex that even his own followers cannot fully comprehend them. Every act of manipulation, every betrayal, every moment when someone reaches for power beyond their station feeds the Lord of Change. He sees the future in all its infinite possibilities and works constantly to shape those futures to his unknowable ends. Nurgle, the Plague Father, represents disease, decay, and paradoxically, a twisted form of hope in the face of inevitable death. He is despair, transformed into acceptance, the slow rot of all things, made into a perverse form of love. Grandfather Nurgle, as his followers call him, spreads his gifts of pestilence with a genuine affection for those he infects. Every plague that spreads, every body that succumbs to illness, every moment of resignation to suffering, strengthens the Fly Lord. And then there is Slaanesh, the Dark Prince, youngest of the Great Four, and perhaps the most insidious. She who thirsts embodies excess in all its forms, the pursuit of sensation and pleasure taken to such extremes that they become agony and horror. Born from the moral corruption of the ancient Eldari civilization, Slaanesh feeds on every act of hedonism, every obsession, every moment when someone loses themselves in the pursuit of perfection or pleasure. The Prince of Chaos is beauty and horror intertwined, seduction and damnation made manifest. These four powers, along with various lesser entities and the mysterious renegade god Malice, hold dominion over the warp. They are sustained by the thoughts and emotions of mortal creatures, growing stronger with every passionate act, every strong emotion, every dark deed committed in the material universe. When an emotion or belief becomes strong enough, widespread enough, it coalesces in the warp into something sentient. The Chaos Gods are the most powerful of these entities, fed by the collective darkness of countless civilizations across millions of years. But this very nature, this dependence on mortal emotion and thought, reveals the first seeds of their vulnerability. The Chaos Gods are not omnipotent. They are not invincible. They are powerful beyond mortal comprehension, yes, but they have limitations, weaknesses, fears. And in the grim darkness of the far future, there are forces and entities that pose genuine threats to their existence. What do gods fear? In the case of the ruinous powers, they fear many things. They fear each other, locked in eternal competition for dominance in the great game. They fear those who exist outside the warp's influence, beings with no souls for them to corrupt or consume. They fear unity, for a galaxy united in purpose could resist their whispers. They fear stagnation, for without conflict and strong emotion, they would starve. They fear order, the imposition of structure and reason that would limit the wild chaos of mortal emotion that sustains them. Above all, perhaps, they fear irrelevance. The Chaos Gods need the material universe. They need mortal beings to think, to feel, to fight, and scheme, and love, and hate. Without that constant influx of psychic energy, they would diminish, perhaps even fade entirely. And so, paradoxically, the same mortal creatures they seek to corrupt and destroy are also necessary for their continued existence. The story of what the Chaos Gods fear is the story of the eternal struggle between order and entropy, between hope and despair, between the material and the immaterial. It is a tale that spans millions of years and touches every corner of the galaxy. It involves ancient machines that predate the stars, living weapons immune to corruption, and the desperate gambles of dying civilizations, making their final stand against an uncaring universe. In the depths of the warp, where demon princes hold court and the very substance of reality bends to the will of the dark gods, there are things that give even these terrible entities pause. There are forces marshalling against them, some ancient beyond measure, others newly emerged. There are weapons being forged that could wound even these immortal beings, and plans being laid that could see their influence diminished or even destroyed. This is the hidden war, the conflict that rages beneath the surface of the galaxy's endless battles. While Space Marines fight Chaos Space Marines, while Imperial Guard die by the millions holding back the tide of corruption, while Inquisitors hunt heretics through the dark corners of the Imperium, there is a deeper struggle taking place. It is a struggle for the very nature of reality itself, a war that will determine not just who rules the galaxy, but what kind of universe will exist in the millennia to come. The Chaos Gods are mighty, they are terrible, they are eternal in ways that mortal minds can barely comprehend. But they are not invincible, and in understanding what they fear, we gain insight into how they might be fought, resisted, perhaps even defeated. We see the cracks in their seemingly impenetrable armor, the weaknesses hidden beneath their overwhelming power. So let us delve into these secrets. Let us examine the forces that keep even the dark gods looking over their metaphorical shoulders. Let us explore what it takes to threaten beings that exist as living concepts, as psychic constructs of such power that they can rewrite reality with a thought. Let us discover what the Chaos Gods fear. The fundamental paradox, their own nature. Before we examine the external threats to the Chaos Gods, we must understand the greatest vulnerability they possess, one that is intrinsic to their very nature. The ruinous powers are, by their fundamental design, their own worst enemies. This is the beautiful irony that lies at the heart of chaos itself. The very characteristics that make these entities so powerful also contain the seeds of their ultimate limitation. Each of the Chaos Gods is monomaniacal, completely single-minded in their focus. This is not a choice or a character flaw in any conventional sense. It is the inevitable result of how they came into being. Khorne is formed entirely from rage and violence. Tzeentch is nothing but ambition and change. Nurgle is despair and decay made manifest. Slaanesh is pure excess and obsession. They cannot be anything other than what they are. They cannot grow beyond their defining characteristics. They cannot, even if they wish to, become more balanced or moderate in their approach. This inflexibility is simultaneously their greatest strength and their most crippling weakness. It gives them incredible focused power within their domain, but it also means they are fundamentally incapable of cooperation, of compromise, of working together toward any common goal for any significant length of time. The Chaos Gods are trapped by their own nature, condemned to eternal conflict not just with the material universe, but with each other. This eternal struggle is called the Great Game, and it is played out across both the warp and real space, with a ferocity that makes mortal wars seem like children's squabbles by comparison. In the realm of chaos, demonic armies clash in battles that have raged for subjective eternities. Horn's bloodthirsty legions surge against Slaanesh's seductive hosts. Tzeentch's reality-bending sorcerers duel with Nurgle's inexorable plague-bearers. Territory in the warp is won and lost. Demon princes rise and fall, and the boundaries between the gods' domains shift like sand in a storm. But the Great Game is not just about territorial conquest in the immaterial realm. It extends into the material universe as well, playing out through the actions of mortal followers, through the corruption of worlds and the corruption of souls. Every chaos cult that pledges itself to one god is an affront to the others. Every demon incursion, led by the servants of one power, is an opportunity for the others to interfere. Every champion of chaos who rises in service to their patron is a potential target for the schemes of rival gods. The rivalry between Horn and Slaanesh is perhaps the most bitter, the most fundamentally irreconcilable. The Blood God views the Dark Prince with absolute contempt. To Khorne, Slaanesh represents everything weak and despicable about sentient beings. Where Khorne values strength, martial prowess, and direct confrontation, Slaanesh embodies manipulation, indulgence, and the internal corruption of pleasure-seeking. The enmity runs so deep that Khorne's followers often refuse to fight alongside those who serve the Prince of Chaos, seeing them as worse than the followers of the Corpse Emperor. The theological split, if one can use such a term for the followers of Chaos, runs deep in their respective philosophies. Khorne demands that his followers prove themselves through personal combat, that they earn their victories through skill at arms and raw courage. The concept of achieving victory through pleasure, through seduction, through the gradual corruption of the enemy's will, rather than the destruction of their body, is anathema to everything the Blood God represents. When Khornate warriors encounter Slaaneshi cultists, the blood flows freely, and the Blood God cares not that it belongs to fellow servants of chaos. This hatred has deep roots in the mythology of chaos itself. There are legends that speak of a confrontation during the birth of Slaanesh, when the Dark Prince was in the process of consuming the Eldari pantheon. Cain, the Eldari god of war, fought against the newly born Chaos God with terrible ferocity. Some accounts suggest that Khorne himself intervened in this battle, not to save Cain, but to deny Slaanesh the satisfaction of the kill. The truth of these events is clouded by the malleable nature of the warp, where time flows strangely and history itself can be rewritten. But the enmity between these two gods is undeniable and absolute. Tzeentch and Nurgle represent another fundamental opposition. The Changer of Ways embodies transformation, evolution, the constant flux of reality shifting from one state to another. Nurgle, by contrast, represents stagnation, the slow, inevitable decline into decay and putrefaction. Where Tzeentch sees endless possibility and seeks to manipulate fate to bring about constant change, Nurgle sees the comforting certainty of death's embrace and the peace that comes with accepting one's inevitable fate. Their philosophical conflict manifests in fascinating ways. Tzeentch's followers are sorcerers, plotters, ambitious souls seeking to transcend their current state and achieve something greater. They believe in progress, in transformation, in the possibility that through sufficient knowledge and power, they can remake themselves and the universe according to their will. Nurgle's followers have surrendered such ambitions. They have accepted that decay is inevitable, that all things must rot and die, and they find a perverse joy in that acceptance. Where Tzeentch promises ascension, Nurgle promises release. The tactical approaches of these two gods could not be more different. Tzeentch works through elaborate schemes that span centuries or even millennia, weaving plots so complex that mortal minds cannot grasp their full scope. His followers infiltrate, they manipulate, they corrupt from within through the seductive promise of forbidden knowledge and ultimate power. Nurgle's approach is far more straightforward. He spreads his plagues, his diseases, his gifts of decay across entire populations. There is a patience to Grandfather Nurgle, but it is the patience of inevitable entropy rather than the calculated patience of a master manipulator. Yet despite their differences, or perhaps because of them, these two gods sometimes find themselves working at cross purposes in ways that benefit neither. A world that Tzeentch has spent decades infiltrating with cults and corrupted officials might suddenly be hit by a Nurgle plague that kills most of the population, ruining the changer of ways carefully laid plans. A system that Nurgle has spent centuries softening up with disease and despair might suddenly be transformed by Tzeentch's machinations. The population given new hope through some revelation or transformation that breaks the grip of the plague god. This self-defeating cycle is not limited to these obvious rivalries. All four of the great chaos gods exist in a state of eternal competition, and they will sabotage each other's efforts with enthusiasm. If Khorne's forces are on the verge of conquering a particularly important world, you can be certain that Tzeentch will have some plot to snatch victory away at the last moment. If Slaanesh begins to gain too much influence in a particular sector, the other gods will work to diminish that influence, not out of any concern for the inhabitants, but simply to prevent their rival from growing too powerful. There is a grim mathematical certainty to this. Whenever one of the Chaos gods comes close to achieving some decisive victory, whenever they grow too powerful relative to their brothers, the others will unite temporarily to bring them down. This is not cooperation in any meaningful sense. It is more like a regulatory mechanism, a cosmic balancing act that prevents any single aspect of chaos from achieving total dominance. The historical record provides evidence of this pattern. There have been moments in the galaxy's history when one chaos god has surged in power, fed by particular circumstances that resonated with their domain. During times of particularly intense warfare, Khorne's power waxes. During great plagues or periods of civilizational collapse, Nurgle grows strong. In ages of great upheaval and change, Tzeentch thrives. During the moral decay of great civilizations, Slaanesh feasts, but these moments of ascendancy are always temporary. The other gods, sensing the shift in power, redirect their efforts toward containing their newly empowered rival. Alliances of convenience form, strange temporary pacts that last only as long as the immediate threat persists. And always, once the immediate danger has passed, once the balance has been restored, these alliances shatter immediately, and the great game resumes with renewed vigor. This self-defeating nature extends beyond just the competition between the gods themselves. The monomaniacal nature of each chaos god means that they sometimes work against their own interests in ways that mortal beings would never tolerate. Khorne, for instance, cares only that blood flows and skulls are taken. He gains power from every death, regardless of whose side the dead were on. This means that Khornate forces will sometimes attack each other with the same enthusiasm they show toward any other enemy. The Blood God's followers have been known to turn on one another in the midst of battle, so consumed by bloodlust that they cannot distinguish friend from foe. Tzeentch's nature presents a different but equally limiting problem. The architect of fate is incapable of allowing any plan to simply succeed without complication. The very concept of a straightforward victory is anathema to the god of scheming. This means that Tzeentch will often sabotage his own victories, introducing unnecessary complexity, betrayal, and reversal simply because that is his nature. A plan that is on the verge of succeeding perfectly will suddenly be complicated by the intervention of the very God who set it in motion. Not because the God has changed his mind about the goal, but because the process of scheming, of introducing chaos and uncertainty, is more important to Tzeentch than any particular outcome. Nurgle's self-defeating tendency manifests in the very nature of his gifts. The plague. Father wants to spread his diseases, to see them consume entire populations. But diseases need hosts to survive. If a plague is too effective, too virulent, it kills everyone too quickly, and then burns itself out. Nurgle's most successful plagues are those that spread slowly, that debilitate without immediately killing, that create long-term chronic suffering rather than swift death. But this restraint goes against the very nature of what these diseases represent. The tension between Nurgle's desire to see his children thrive and the self-limiting nature of disease itself creates a constant cycle of bloom and die off that prevents the plague god from achieving total dominion. Slaanesh faces perhaps the subtlest but most profound self-defeating cycle of all. The Dark Prince feeds on excess, on the pursuit of sensation beyond all reasonable bounds. But there is a mathematical reality to sensation. The more you experience something, the more you need to experience it even more intensely to achieve the same effect. This means that Slaanesh's followers are caught in an ever-escalating spiral of need. They must constantly seek new experiences, more extreme sensations, greater levels of excess, simply to maintain the same level of satisfaction. Eventually, inevitably, they burn out. They become so jaded, so deadened to sensation, that nothing can satisfy them anymore. At this point, they often self-destruct, or are transformed into chaos spawn, mindless aberrations that serve Slaanesh, but no longer provide the rich emotional sustenance that the god craves. This creates a kind of circular hunger for Slaanesh. The god needs followers who can still feel, who can still be driven to greater heights of excess. But the very process of serving Slaanesh burns out this capacity over time. The Prince of Chaos is constantly consuming and destroying the very thing that sustains her power, forcing her to constantly seek out new sources of corruption, new civilizations to seduce and destroy. The inability of the Chaos Gods to maintain unity, to work together toward common goals, has shaped the course of galactic history in profound ways. There have been moments when, if the forces of chaos had been able to truly unite, they could have achieved overwhelming victories. But those moments have passed because the fundamental nature of chaos prevents such unity from lasting more than the briefest instant. The clearest example of this limitation came during the Horus Heresy, the galaxy-shaking civil war that nearly destroyed the Imperium of man 10,000 years ago. This was the one time in recorded history when all four Chaos Gods worked together, when they set aside their rivalries in pursuit of a common goal: the corruption and destruction of the Emperor of mankind and the overthrow of the Imperium he had built. The scale of this coordinated effort was unprecedented. All four gods poured their power into the conspiracy, each offering their gifts to the War Master Horus and his fellow traitor Primarchs. Khorne granted martial prowess beyond measure. Tzeentch offered forbidden knowledge and sorcerous power. Nurgle bestowed terrible diseases that even the superhuman physiology of space marines struggled to resist. Slaanesh whispered promises of perfection and ultimate sensation. United, even temporarily, the Chaos Gods represented a threat that brought the Imperium to its knees. And yet, even during this period of unprecedented cooperation, the cracks showed. The traitor legions that fell to chaos during the heresy did not remain unified. They fragmented along the lines of which god they primarily served. The Emperor's children descended into Slaaneshi excess. The World Eaters were consumed by Khornate rage. The Death Guard succumbed to Nurgle's plagues.
You know, I have to say, after years of diving into Warhammer lore, the relationship between the Emperor and the Chaos God still fascinates me on a personal level. Think about it. Here's this being who spent 30,000 years guiding humanity in secret, who finally revealed himself to unite the pieces, only to be brought down by his own sons. And now he sits on that throne for 10 millennia, neither alive or dead, slowly transforming into something else entirely. The tragic irony is that he fought so hard against being worshipped as a god, and now that very worship might be the only thing keeping him alive. In the Imperium, it's this kind of layered, complex storytelling that keeps me coming back to the setting. There's no clear good or evil here, just different shades of necessity and survival in a universe that's fundamentally hostile to all life. Anyway, let's get back to the story.
The Thousand Sons embraced Zentian sorcery. These fractured alliances worked together only because the immediate threat of the Emperor loomed larger than their rivalries. But the moment that immediate threat was neutralized, the moment the Emperor was confined to the Golden Throne, the unity of chaos shattered. The retreat of the traitor legions into the Eye of Terror following their defeat at Terra marked the end of Chaos's greatest coordinated effort. In the 10,000 years since, they have never again managed to present such a united front. Individual Black Crusades have erupted from the Eye of Terror. Massive warbands have ravaged Imperial space. Demon worlds have spat forth their corruption across countless systems. But never again have all the forces of chaos worked together with anything approaching the level of coordination they achieved during the heresy. This is the fundamental vulnerability that defines the Chaos Gods. They are powerful beyond mortal comprehension, but they are also hopelessly divided, eternally at war with themselves. They are their own worst enemies, locked in a cycle of competition and betrayal that prevents them from ever achieving total victory. Every strength they possess carries within it a corresponding weakness. Every power they wield comes with limitations built into its very nature. The Blood God's fury makes him mighty in war, but blinds him to subtler strategies. The Changer of Ways' endless scheming makes him a master manipulator, but prevents him from ever achieving simple, straightforward victories. The Plague. Father's patience makes his corruption nearly inevitable, but also ensures it spreads slowly enough to be contained and fought. The Dark Prince's ability to exploit desire makes corruption seductive, but also ensures that corruption burns out over time. This paradox is perhaps the greatest hope that the forces of order have. As long as the Chaos Gods remain divided, as long as they cannot overcome their fundamental nature to work together, there is a limit to what they can achieve. They can corrupt worlds, destroy civilizations, spread suffering across the stars, but they cannot achieve total, permanent victory. Because to do so would require a level of unity and cooperation that their very nature makes impossible. And so, the great game continues, has continued for millennia, will continue for millennia to come. The Chaos Gods clash in the warp, their mortal followers wage war in real space, and the galaxy bleeds from a million cuts. But the wounds, terrible as they are not fatal, not yet. Not as long as the Dark Gods continue to turn their fury on each other as much as on the material universe. The Anathema, the Emperor of mankind. If there is one being in all the galaxy that the Chaos Gods truly fear as a unified threat, one entity that has driven them to set aside their eternal rivalries, even if only temporarily, it is the Emperor of mankind. The forces of chaos do not speak his name with reverence. They call him the False Emperor, the Corpse Emperor, and most tellingly, the Anathema. This last title reveals everything about what the Emperor represents to the Dark Gods. He is their opposite, their nemesis, the one force in the material universe that has consistently resisted their corruption and worked actively toward their defeat. To understand why the Emperor inspires such fear in the Chaos Gods, we must understand what he is and what he represents. The Emperor is not, despite what the Imperium claims, a god in the traditional sense. But he is also far more than simply a man. even a man with extraordinary psychic powers. The Emperor is a perpetual, an immortal being who has walked the earth for tens of thousands of years, guiding humanity from behind the scenes through its darkest hours and its brightest triumphs. His psychic might is unparalleled in the history of the human species. Some accounts suggest that he is the product of a ritual performed in ancient times, where thousands of human shamans sacrificed themselves and merged their souls into a single entity to create a guardian for humanity. Other accounts are less specific about his origins, but all agree on one fundamental truth. The Emperor is the most powerful human psyker to have ever lived, a being whose consciousness burns in the warp like a blazing sun. But the Emperor's power alone is not what makes him the anathema. The Chaos Gods have faced powerful psykers before. They have corrupted beings of tremendous psychic might, turned them into demon princes, or simply consumed their souls as particularly delicious morsels. What makes the Emperor different? What makes him dangerous to chaos on a fundamental level is not just his power, but his complete and utter immunity to their corruption. The Chaos Gods cannot touch the Emperor. They cannot tempt him. They cannot corrupt him. They cannot even influence his thoughts or emotions in the way they can with virtually every other sentient being in the galaxy. This immunity is not merely a matter of mental discipline or strong will, though the Emperor possesses both in abundance. It is something deeper, something intrinsic to his very nature. He exists somehow outside the normal relationship between mortal souls and the warp, untouchable by the gods that have corrupted or destroyed countless trillions of lesser beings. This immunity extends beyond the Emperor himself in ways that the Chaos Gods find particularly galling. The Emperor has demonstrated the ability to shield others from the touch of chaos, to create zones of reality where the warp's influence is diminished or negated entirely. During the Great Crusade, his very presence was enough to drive back demons, to close warp rifts, to cleanse worlds that had been corrupted by chaos's touch. He was not just resistant to chaos, he was actively antithetical to it, a being whose existence pushed back against the influence of the dark gods. The Emperor's grand plan, had it succeeded, would have struck at the very foundations of chaos's power. He sought to create a galactic civilization united under the banner of the imperial truth, a philosophy that denied the existence of gods entirely. This was not mere atheism or rejection of religion as humans typically understand it. The imperial truth went deeper. It sought to reshape human consciousness itself, to condition billions of minds, to reject not just the worship of gods, but the very concept of gods as having any power or reality. The genius and the danger of this plan, from Chaos's perspective, becomes clear when we remember what the Chaos Gods are and how they function. They are psychic constructs sustained by belief and emotion. They exist because sentient beings think and feel in ways that give them form and power in the warp. If the Emperor had succeeded in spreading the imperial truth throughout the galaxy, if he had created a civilization of trillions who genuinely did not believe in the power of gods, who approached the universe from a purely rational and materialistic perspective, the Chaos Gods would have been starved of a significant portion of their sustenance. The plan went even deeper than mere denial of belief. The Emperor was working on the creation of the Imperial Webway, a human-controlled network of stable tunnels through the warp that would have allowed interstellar travel without exposing humans to the direct influence of chaos. If this project had been completed, humanity would no longer need navigators to guide ships through the warp. They would no longer need to take the terrible risk that every warp journey represents. That moment when the barriers between real space and the immaterium grow thin and demons might slip through. Humanity would be, if not completely free from chaos's influence, at least significantly less vulnerable to it. The Chaos Gods recognized this threat. They understood that if the Emperor's plans came to fruition, their hold on the galaxy would be severely diminished. Humanity represented a significant portion of the psychic energy that fed the dark gods. And if that species could be removed from their reach, if billions of human souls could be shielded from chaos's influence, the balance of power in the eternal war between order and entropy would shift dramatically. And so, the Chaos Gods did something unprecedented in the history of the galaxy. They set aside their endless rivalries and worked together, coordinating their efforts toward a single goal. They needed to stop the Emperor. They needed to derail his plans before the Imperial webway could be completed, before the Imperial truth could take such deep root in human consciousness that it became unshakable. They needed to destroy, or at least cripple, the one being who posed an existential threat to their continued dominance. The method they chose was as brilliant as it was devastating. They would turn the Emperor's own sons against him. The Primarchs, 20 superhumans created by the Emperor's own hand to lead his armies in the Great Crusade, became the focus of Chaos's greatest plot. As infants, before they could be fully prepared and armored against Chaos's influence, the Primarchs were scattered across the galaxy by the Dark Gods, each landing on a different world, each shaped by radically different upbringings that the Emperor had never intended. When the Emperor eventually found and reunited with his sons, they were no longer entirely his. They had been shaped by experiences that made them vulnerable to chaos in ways the Emperor had never anticipated. And the Chaos Gods were patient, waiting for the right moment, the right circumstances, to spring their trap. That moment came with Horus Lupercal, the War Master, the Emperor's most beloved son, the Primarch who had been elevated to command the entire Great Crusade in the Emperor's name. The details of Horus's corruption need not concern us here, but the result was catastrophic. The War Master turned traitor, and he did not turn alone. Fully half of the Space Marine legions followed him into damnation, taking billions of Imperial army soldiers and countless other resources with them. The galaxy erupted into civil war, and at its climax, Horus led his forces to Terra itself, to the Emperor's own throne room, and there confronted his father in single combat. The exact details of that final confrontation are known only to a few, and accounts differ even among those who claim knowledge. But what is certain is this: the Emperor struck down Horus, obliterated the War Master's soul so completely that even the Chaos Gods could not preserve or resurrect him. But the cost of this victory was terrible. The Emperor was grievously wounded, his physical body broken beyond any hope of natural healing. He was installed upon the Golden Throne, an ancient artifact of incredible power, where 10,000 psychers are sacrificed daily to sustain his failing body and allow his consciousness to continue its work. For 10,000 years, the Emperor has sat upon the Golden Throne, neither truly alive nor truly dead. His physical form is a withered husk, kept functional only by the most advanced life support systems the Mechanicus can devise. But his psychic presence has, if anything, grown stronger over the millennia. In the warp, the Emperor's spirit blazes brighter than ever, a beacon that guides humanity's ships through the nightmare realm of the Imperium, a shield that holds back the worst of Chaos's predations. The Chaos Gods achieved their goal. They stopped the Emperor's plan. The Imperial Webway project lies in ruins, shattered during the heresy when Magnus the Red, another of the fallen Primarchs, unwittingly broke through the psychic barriers the Emperor had erected to protect it. The Imperial truth gave way to the worship of the Emperor himself as a god, the very thing he had tried to prevent. The unified, rational civilization he had envisioned fractured into the theocratic tyranny that is the Imperium of the 42nd millennium, rife with superstition, suspicion, and zealous faith. And yet, the Chaos Gods did not win. Not completely. The Emperor yet lives, after a fashion. His consciousness remains active in the warp, battling the forces of chaos on a level that mortal minds cannot comprehend. He still guides the Astronomicon, the psychic lighthouse that makes interstellar navigation possible for the Imperium. He still protects humanity, still extends his influence across the galaxy in ways both subtle and overt. More than this, the Emperor's presence in the warp has been changing over the 10,000 years of his confinement. The countless trillions of humans who worship him, who pray to him, who offer up their devotion and their suffering in his name, have been feeding him psychic energy in the same way that emotions feed the chaos gods. The irony is profound. In trying to avoid being worshipped as a god, the Emperor created a religion that now sustains him as one. There are those among the most learned and heretical of imperial scholars who suggest that the Emperor is becoming, or perhaps has already become, a fifth chaos god in his own right. Not a god of chaos, but a god born from the same mechanisms, sustained by belief and emotion and the psychic energy of mortal minds. If this is true, if the Emperor is indeed transforming into a warp entity of comparable power to the dark gods, then the balance of power in the eternal war has not shifted as decisively in Chaos's favor as they might have hoped. The Chaos gods cannot destroy the Emperor, not in his current state. They have tried. Demon armies have assaulted Terra countless times over the millennia, seeking to reach the Golden Throne and finish what Horus started. But the defenses of the Imperial Palace have held, manned by the Emperor's most devoted servants, the Adeptus Custodes, 10,000 warriors, each of whom is worth 100 Space Marines in combat. The Grey Knights, an entire chapter of Space Marines created specifically to fight demons, stand eternal vigil against incursions from the warp. And beyond these physical defenses, the Emperor himself fights in the Imperium, his psychic might holding back tides of demons that would otherwise overwhelm Terra and the surrounding systems. There is a stalemate, but it is a stalemate that terrifies the Chaos gods, because the Emperor's power continues to grow. With each passing year, with each new worshipper added to the Imperium's countless trillions, with each prayer offered up in his name, the Emperor's psychic presence in the warp becomes stronger. And there are whispers, terrifying to the forces of chaos, that the Emperor has a plan. Some speak of the Emperor's soul reaching critical mass, of a moment coming when his power will be sufficient to break free from the Golden Throne entirely, to manifest in the warp as a fully realized god capable of battling the Chaos gods directly. Others suggest that the Emperor is preparing for one final gambit, that he will allow his physical body to die completely so that his consciousness can be reborn in the warp without the limitations of flesh. Still others believe that the Emperor is simply waiting, conserving his strength, holding back the darkness until the right moment arrives. The truth is unknowable, clouded by prophecy and hope and the malleable nature of the warp itself. But what is certain is that the Chaos gods watch the Golden Throne with an attention that borders on obsession. They know that the Emperor represents a threat to their very existence. They know that he is the one being in the galaxy who has demonstrated the ability to genuinely resist them, to plan for their eventual defeat, to rally the forces of order against the tide of entropy. Recent events have only heightened their concern. The return of Robert Guilliman, the Primarch of the Ultramarines, from his 10,000-year suspension, is a development that has sent ripples through the warp. Guilliman's resurrection required the cooperation of the Eldari faction known as the Inari, servants of the nascent god of death, Iniad, and it was accomplished in part through what appeared to be the direct intervention of the Emperor's power. That the Emperor can still reach out from the Golden Throne, still influence events in the material universe, still work toward his long-term goals, is a reminder to the Chaos gods that their ancient enemy is far from defeated. Guilliman's first action upon reaching Terra and meeting with his father was a revelation that has sent scholars and theologians into frenzies of speculation. The Primarch emerged from that meeting profoundly shaken, speaking of an entity that wore his father's face, but had changed into something vast and terrible and utterly inhuman. Some interpret this as evidence that the Emperor is indeed becoming a god, that his humanity is being burned away in the fires of worship and psychic transformation. Others see it as proof that the Emperor has become something new, something that even the Chaos Gods should fear. The Imperium itself, for all its flaws and its descent into ignorance and superstition, serves as a bulwark against chaos that the Dark Gods cannot easily overcome. The sheer scale of the Imperium, spanning millions of worlds and trillions of human souls, means that even if chaos corrupts one world, 1,000 others remain to resist them. The Inquisition, for all its excesses and its tendency towards zealous overreach, does successfully root out and destroy chaos cults before they can spread too far. The Space Marines, the Emperor's Angels of Death, continue to fight against the forces of chaos across the galaxy. And everywhere, on every Imperial world, in every temple and shrine, the faithful pray. They pray to the Emperor for protection, for victory, for salvation from the darkness. Each prayer is a tiny spark of psychic energy that feeds the Emperor's power in the warp. Multiplied across billions of believers, these prayers become a flood of psychic might that sustains the Emperor's consciousness and allows him to continue his eternal vigil. The Chaos Gods understand all too well what this means. They see the Emperor not as he is, a broken corpse sustained by ancient technology, but as he might become, a being of power comparable to, or perhaps even exceeding their own, sustained by belief as they are, but representing something antithetical to everything they embody. Where they are chaos, he would be order. Where they are division, he would be unity. Where they are entropy and decay, he would be purpose and structure. This is what the Chaos Gods fear when they fear the Emperor, not his current state, diminished and confined as it is, but his potential. The Emperor is a seed of possibility that could bloom into something that genuinely threatens the fundamental nature of the galaxy. He is a reminder that even the Dark Gods are not invincible, that they can be resisted, that their corruption is not inevitable. And so they continue to plot against him, to scheme for his final destruction. They corrupt his servants. They send demon armies against terror. They whisper promises to those who might be tempted to sabotage the Golden Throne. But 10,000 years of effort have not achieved what Horus could not accomplish in person. The Emperor endures, and with each passing century, with each new miracle attributed to his divine intervention, with each moment when his power manifests to save the faithful from certain doom, the question grows more urgent. What will happen when the Emperor finally chooses to act? That question keeps the Chaos Gods awake, insofar as entities without true physical form can be said to sleep. It drives them to greater efforts, to more desperate schemes, because they know that the Emperor is the one enemy who has already proved capable of denying them, of building something that resisted their corruption for centuries. And they know that if he were to rise again, in whatever form that might take, the eternal war might finally tip decisively against them. The soulless opposition, Necrons and the Catan, among the ancient horrors that haunt the galaxy, few are as antithetical to the Chaos Gods as the Necrons and their former masters, the Citan. These beings represent something fundamentally alien to the nature of chaos, something that exists entirely outside the relationship between emotion and the warp that defines the Dark God's existence. To understand why the Necrons terrify the Chaos Gods in ways that even the Emperor might not, we must delve into a history that predates the birth of the youngest Chaos Gods by millions of years. The Necrons were not always the soulless machines they are today. Once, they were the Necrontyr, an organic species plagued by short, cancer-riddled lifespans due to the intense radiation of their sun. Their civilization achieved remarkable technological heights despite this handicap, but they were consumed by a collective bitterness at the cruel hand fate had dealt them. When they encountered the Old Ones, an ancient race of almost godlike power who had mastered biological engineering and had lifespans measured in millions of years, the Necrontyr's envy transformed into hatred. The war in heaven that followed was a conflict on a scale that modern species can barely comprehend. The Necrontyr, despite their advanced technology, were losing badly against the old ones and their client races. In their desperation, they made a terrible bargain. They had discovered beings they called the Satan, the star gods, entities that fed on stellar radiation and existed in the material universe rather than the warp. The Necrontyr offered to construct physical bodies for these energy beings, to give them form and purpose, in exchange for the power to defeat the old ones. The Satan accepted this bargain, but they brought a price beyond what the Necrontyr had imagined. They offered the Necrontyr immortality, an end to the weakness of flesh and the curse of their short lifespans. The species would undergo biotransference, their consciousness transferred into bodies of living metal that would never age, never sicken, never die. The Necrontyr, desperate and envious, agreed almost to a man. Too late, they discovered the true cost. In transferring their minds into mechanical bodies, they lost their souls entirely. This is the crucial point, the reason why the Necrons represent such a profound threat to the Chaos Gods. The Necrons have no souls. They cast no reflection in the warp. They are invisible to demonic senses, immune to psychic powers, untouchable by the corruption that chaos spreads so easily through other species. Khorne cannot harvest their skulls in any meaningful sense, for they are machines. Nurgle's plagues cannot touch bodies of living metal. Tzeentch's sorceries break against minds that exist as engrams in immortal circuits, rather than as souls tethered to the warp. Slaanesh cannot seduce beings who no longer experience pleasure or pain in any conventional sense. The Satan themselves are equally troubling to the Chaos Gods, though for different reasons. These star gods exist entirely in the material universe, feeding on physical energy rather than emotion. They are gods in their own right, beings of immense power, but they are fundamentally different from the Chaos Gods. Where the dark gods are psychic constructs given form by belief and emotion, the Satan are physical entities that have always existed in real space. They do not need worship or emotion to sustain them. They do not depend on the warp at all. During the war in heaven, the Necrons and the Satan came perilously close to achieving something that would have been catastrophic for the Chaos Gods. They nearly succeeded in closing off the warp from the material universe entirely. This was their plan to defeat the Old Ones and their Psyker races. If they could sever the connection between real space and the Imperium, the Old Ones would lose their greatest advantage. But such an action would have had consequences far beyond the immediate tactical goal. If the warp was sealed off from the material universe, the Chaos Gods would lose access to the emotions and psychic energy that sustains them. They would not necessarily die, for they exist in the warp itself. But their influence in the material galaxy would be reduced to virtually nothing. The pylons that the Necrons constructed as part of this grand plan still exist scattered across the galaxy. These massive structures project what is essentially an anti-psychic field, a zone where the barrier between real space and the warp is reinforced and stabilized. In areas near active pylons, psychic powers are weakened or negated entirely. Warp travel becomes difficult or impossible. Demon incursions cannot occur because daemons simply cannot manifest in real space within the pylon's area of effect. Cadia, the fortress world that for 10,000 years stood guardian over the Eye of Terror, was ringed by such pylons. This was why chaos forces emerging from the Eye found it so difficult to advance past Cadia, despite countless Black Crusades. The pylons didn't just make it harder for demons to manifest, they actively pushed back against the influence of chaos, creating a stable zone of real space that resisted corruption. The destruction of Cadia during the 13th Black Crusade, the shattering of the planet itself, was as much about destroying these pylons as it was about any strategic military objective. The Chaos Gods know that scattered across the galaxy, many more pylons slumber in Necron tomb worlds, and they know that if the Necrons were ever to fully awaken, if these ancient machines were ever to restart their project of sealing off the warp, it would represent an existential threat to chaos itself. This is not a threat that can be corrupted or seduced. The Necrons cannot be tempted by offers of power because they already possess technologies that seem like magic to lesser races. They cannot be promised immortality because they have already achieved it, albeit at terrible cost. They cannot be bargained with because they remember the war in heaven, remember when they fought against the very concept of the warp itself. The Satan, though most are now shattered into fragments and imprisoned by the Necrons themselves, represent another facet of this threat. These beings demonstrated during the war in heaven that gods of the material universe can exist, that not all divinity need be born from the warp and sustained by emotion. The very existence of the Satan is a challenge to the Chaos God's dominance, a reminder that they are not the only game in town when it comes to entities of godlike power. Moreover, the Satan have a weakness that the Chaos Gods lack. They can be killed. Oh, it is phenomenally difficult to do so, requiring weapons and energies that only the most advanced species can muster. And when a Satan is destroyed, the consequences can be catastrophic, literally breaking fundamental laws of physics in the immediate area. But it can be done. The Necrons proved this when they turned on their masters after the war in heaven, shattering most of the Satan into fragments and imprisoning those fragments in tesseract labyrinths for use as weapons. This sets a troubling precedent for the Chaos Gods. If the Satan, beings of similar godlike power, can be destroyed, then perhaps the Chaos Gods could be as well, given the right weapon and the right circumstances. The Necrons don't know how to do this, don't possess weapons that can directly harm entities of pure psychic energy. But the fact that they killed gods once before suggests the possibility that they could learn, could develop such capabilities. The Necrons' technology is, in many ways, more advanced than anything else in the current galaxy. Their Gauss weapons strip matter down to its constituent atoms. Their resurrection protocols allow them to repair even catastrophic damage. Their understanding of physics allows them to manipulate time, space, and dimension in ways that other species can barely comprehend. If this technological prowess were ever to be turned toward the problem of fighting chaos directly, the results could be devastating. There is evidence that some Necron cryptechs and overlords are indeed working on such projects. The Necrons remember the war in heaven, remember when psycho races and the energies of the warp were weapons used against them. Some among the Necrons seek to resume the ancient project of sealing off the warp entirely. Others are developing new weapons specifically designed to combat demonic incursions and chaos corruption. Still others are experimenting with ways to harness the power of the Satan shards they possess, turning the power of material gods against the gods of the Imperium. The scale of the Necron threat becomes even clearer when we consider the vast numbers that still slumber in tomb worlds across the galaxy. No one knows how many Necrons exist in total. Entire dynasties sleep in stasis, waiting for the right moment to awaken. Each tomb world contains millions, perhaps billions of these immortal warriors, all loyal to their overlords, all implacable foes of anything that exists in the warp. As more tomb worlds awaken, as the Necrons begin to reassert their ancient dominion over the galaxy, they represent a growing threat that chaos cannot easily counter. The Chaos Gods can corrupt organic species, can twist flesh and warp minds, but living metal does not mutate. Machine consciousnesses do not fall to temptation. The Necrons are, in a very real sense, one of the few forces in the galaxy that chaos simply cannot touch through its usual methods. This immunity extends even to the Necrons' ability to travel. Where other species must brave the horrors of the warp to cross interstellar distances, the Necrons possess inertialess drives that allow them to travel through real space at speeds that, while slower than warp travel in absolute terms, are fast enough for their purposes. They do not need to expose themselves to the realm where chaos holds dominion. They can wage their wars, pursue their agendas, and reclaim their ancient empire without ever giving the Dark Gods an opportunity to corrupt them. The strategic implications of this are profound. As the Necrons awaken and begin to push back against the younger species that have claimed the galaxy during their long sleep, they will inevitably come into conflict with chaos forces. And in those conflicts, Chaos will find itself fighting an enemy that negates many of its most potent advantages. Daemon armies will struggle to manifest near Necron forces. Their ability to tear open reality and spill forth from the warp, disrupted by the Necron's nullfield technology. Chaos sorcerers will find their powers weakened or useless. Corruption will have no purchase on bodies that were never truly alive to begin with. There is even a more terrifying possibility that the Chaos gods must consider. During the war in heaven, the Old Ones created new species and uplifted existing ones to serve as soldiers and workers in their war effort. The immense psychic awakening that this caused, all these new psycho species, generating emotions and thoughts across the galaxy, created the conditions in the warp that eventually gave birth to the Chaos gods themselves. The war was so terrible, so filled with death and suffering on a cosmic scale, that it warped the Imperium from a relatively calm realm into the hell dimension it is today. If the Necrons were to resume the war in heaven in earnest, if they were to pursue the extermination of all life in the galaxy, or the sealing off of the warp with the same single-minded focus they brought to their war against the Old Ones, what would be the result? In the short term, certainly, the violence and death would feed the Chaos gods, particularly Khorne. But in the long term, if the Necrons succeeded in eliminating all psychic species, or in sealing off the warp entirely, the Chaos gods would find themselves cut off from the source of their power. This is not a war the Chaos gods can win through corruption. They cannot whisper promises to beings who have no souls to corrupt. They cannot offer power to creatures who already wield technologies that seem like sorcery. They cannot tempt the Necrons with anything because the Necrons have already paid the ultimate price for immortality and have spent millions of years regretting that bargain. The only way Chaos can fight the Necrons is through direct military force, demon against machine, and history suggests that such confrontations do not always favor the forces of Chaos. The awakening of the Necrons is a slow process, happening in fits and starts across the galaxy as different tomb worlds come back online after millions of years of slumber. But with each awakening, with each new pylon activated, with each new Necron fleet emerging from its ancient tomb complex, the balance of power shifts slightly. The galaxy is not what it was during the war in heaven, and the Necrons have awakened to find it filled with species they do not recognize, empires they did not know existed. But they remember their purpose. They remember that they sought dominion over the material universe, untainted by the corruption of the warp. And in that memory, in that ancient purpose, lies a threat that even the Chaos gods must fear. Because the Necrons represent the possibility of a galaxy where the warp and the material universe are separate again, where the mad energies of chaos cannot reach out to corrupt and destroy. The Necrons are a reminder that the current state of the galaxy, where chaos has such terrible influence, is not inevitable. It is a relatively recent development in the vast span of cosmic history, and what was done can potentially be undone. The Chaos gods cannot afford to ignore the Necron threat. They cannot simply wait and hope that these ancient machines will remain dormant. Because every tomb world that awakens, every pylon that activates, every moment that the Necrons work toward their ancient goals represents a step toward a future where Chaos's power is diminished or eliminated entirely. It is a race against time, and the terrifying thing for Chaos is that the Necrons have all the time in the world. They are patient, they are methodical, and they will never, ever stop. The void within, blanks and pariahs. Among all the horrors and wonders of the Warhammer 40,000 universe, few phenomena are as deeply unsettling as the blank, also known as the untouchable or the pariah. These individuals represent a different kind of threat to the Chaos gods, one that is more subtle than the overwhelming might of the Emperor or the ancient technology of the Necrons, but no less terrifying in its implications. Blanks are human beings born with a genetic anomaly called the pariah gene, and they possess a trait that makes them anathema to everything the warp represents. They have no souls. To understand the threat that blanks pose to chaos, we must first understand what this means. In the Warhammer universe, All sentient beings have a presence in the warp, a reflection of their consciousness that exists in that immaterial realm. This soul is what allows psykers to channel the warp's energies, what gives demons purchase to manifest in real space, and what provides the chaos gods with the emotional sustenance they need to exist. But blanks have no such presence. When a psyker looks at a blank with their witch sight, they see nothing, an absence so profound that it is genuinely terrifying. More than simply lacking a soul, blanks actively repel the warp. Their mere presence dampens psychic phenomena, creating a bubble of null space where the powers of the Imperium cannot easily reach. This field varies in strength from one blank to another. Some blanks produce only a subtle effect, creating a vague sense of unease in those around them. True pariahs, individuals in whom the gene expresses most fully, produce an effect so powerful that psykers in their immediate vicinity can be driven insane or even killed outright. Their connection to the warp severed so brutally that their consciousness cannot handle the shock. For demons, entities composed entirely of warp energy, the presence of a blank is agony. It is like being forced to exist in a void, a space where the very substance of their being cannot properly manifest. Demons that attempt to approach a powerful blank find themselves weakened, their forms becoming insubstantial, their powers failing. Close enough proximity to a strong pariah can force a demon back into the warp entirely, banishing it without the need for any ritual or blessing. The Culexus Temple of the Officio Assassinorum specializes in recruiting and training these individuals. Culexus assassins are living weapons designed specifically to hunt and kill psykers, and they are among the most feared agents in the entire Imperium. Their victims do not die cleanly. When a Culexus assassin unleashes the full power of their null field, channeled and amplified through their specialized equipment, the result is a psychic scream that can obliterate souls wholesale. Psykers caught in this blast do not simply die, they are erased, their consciousness shredded so thoroughly that even the chaos gods cannot claim their souls. The animus speculum, the specialized weapon that Culexus assassins carry, focuses and weaponizes this negative psychic energy. It can channel the accumulated psychic potential of nearby psykers, the very energy they draw from the warp, and fire it back at them in a blast that liquefies their brains and destroys their souls. For chaos sorcerers and demon summoners, a Culexus assassin represents the ultimate counter. All their accumulated power, all their dark gifts, turned against them by a being they cannot detect with their psychic senses until it is far too late. The Sisters of Silence represent another aspect of this threat. This all-female military organization, active during the Great Crusade, and recently returned to service in the 42nd Millennium, consists entirely of blanks. They fought during the Horus Heresy as one of the most effective forces against the demonic incursions of that terrible time. Their very presence made it difficult for chaos forces to use their psychic powers, and entire demon legions found themselves weakened and vulnerable when the Sisters of Silence took to the field. The historical significance of the Sisters of Silence cannot be overstated. During the height of the Great Crusade, when the Emperor was actively working to suppress knowledge of chaos and limit the influence of the warp, the Sisters of Silence served as an insurance policy. They were proof that humanity possessed a natural defense against the powers of the warp, individuals who could operate in areas where demons held sway without fear of corruption. When Magnus the Red broke through the psychic wards protecting the Emperor's Webway project, it was the Sisters of Silence who fought alongside the Adeptus Custodes to hold back the demon tide that poured through the breach. But the true terror that blanks represent to the Chaos Gods is not just their individual power, it is their existence as a proof of concept. The pariah gene can be inherited. Children of blanks have a higher chance of being blanks themselves. This means that, in theory, it would be possible to breed an entire population of blanks, to create communities or even civilizations of humans who are immune to chaos corruption. Some accounts suggest that the pariah gene was engineered into humanity deliberately in the distant past, possibly by one of the Cetan, specifically the Deceiver. The purpose would have been to create a population that could resist the influence of the warp, soldiers in the eternal war between the material universe and the Imperium. Whether this origin story is true or not, the fact remains that the gene exists, and its potential applications in the fight against chaos are staggering. The Imperium has never fully exploited this potential, partly because blanks are so rare, and partly because they are so deeply disturbing to normal humans. The presence of a blank creates an instinctive unease in anyone with a soul, an uncomfortable feeling that something is wrong with the blank on a fundamental level. This is not mere superstition or prejudice, it is a genuine psychic effect, the result of every sentient being having at least a small connection to the warp, and that connection recoiling from the void where the blank exists. As a result, blanks are often ostracized, sometimes killed, frequently abandoned by their families, or driven from their communities. They lead difficult lives, shunned by normal society, unable to form the normal human connections that others take for granted. This social stigma, combined with their rarity, has prevented the Imperium from ever creating dedicated armies of blanks or establishing programs to breed them systematically. The political and social obstacles are simply too great, despite the clear military advantages such individuals would provide. But imagine if those obstacles were overcome. Imagine if the Imperium, or some other human faction, decided to dedicate serious resources to identifying and training blanks, to creating specialized military units composed entirely of these individuals. Such units would be devastating against chaos forces. Demon armies would find themselves unable to manifest. Chaos sorcerers would be rendered powerless. Psykers touched by chaos would be vulnerable in ways they never are against conventional forces. Even more terrifying from chaos's perspective, imagine if the technology to artificially create blanks or enhance the pariah gene were developed. The Emperor himself placed a moratorium on such research after early experiments ended in disaster, but the knowledge exists. The Mechanicum conducted extensive studies of the pariah gene during the Great Crusade. That data still exists somewhere in the depths of the Martian vaults. If it were ever recovered and properly applied, the results could shift the balance of power dramatically. The Black Pariah Project, a secret endeavor by the Culexus Temple, attempted to create an enhanced blank, one who could weaponize their null field without the need for external equipment. The sole product of this project, known only as Spear, was deemed too unstable for deployment and was supposed to be destroyed. That he ended up corrupted by chaos through an extremely complex and dangerous process only proves how threatening blanks are to the dark gods. They had to go to extraordinary lengths, involving the binding of a demon to a being who naturally repelled chaos, just to create a single corrupted blank. The theoretical potential of blanks goes even further. During the Great Crusade, when large numbers of blanks were being transported to Terra for the Sisters of Silence program, it was discovered that sufficient concentrations of these individuals could actually block the Astronomicon. The psychic beacon that allows navigators to guide ships through the warp, the light that serves as humanity's sole reliable means of interstellar navigation, was being dimmed by the collective null field of thousands of blanks in one location. This incident caused panic among the High Lords of Terra. Some called for the termination of all blanks, for their systematic extermination as a threat to the Imperium itself. The fact that this did not happen, that the Sisters of Silence were allowed to continue their recruitment and the Culexus Temple to continue its work, speaks to the realization that blanks were too useful against chaos to eliminate entirely. But the incident reveals a terrifying possibility. If enough blanks were gathered in one place, if their null fields were somehow amplified or focused, they could potentially create a region of space where the warp's influence was negated entirely. Such a zone would be devastating to the chaos gods. Demons could not manifest there. Chaos corruption could not spread. Warp travel would become impossible. But that might be an acceptable price for creating a region of space that was genuinely secure from chaos's influence. A fortress world ringed with blanks, perhaps enhanced or amplified through some kind of technology, could become effectively immune to demonic invasion. The Necron's pylon technology works on similar principles, creating zones where the barrier between real space and the warp is reinforced. But pylons are massive structures, difficult to build and easy to target. Blanks are mobile, self-sufficient, and can be deployed wherever needed. If the technology of pylons and the natural abilities of blanks could somehow be combined, the result would be a weapon against chaos, more effective than anything currently in the Imperium's arsenal. From the Chaos God's perspective, blanks represent a fundamental threat to the way they interact with the material universe. These individuals prove that it is possible for humans to exist without souls, to function as thinking, acting beings while remaining completely immune to the influence of the warp. Every blank that exists is a tiny zone of reality that chaos cannot touch, a piece of the material universe that remains forever beyond their reach. The rarity of blanks, their social isolation, and the limitations on their use are the only things that have prevented them from becoming a more serious threat to chaos. But these factors are not permanent. Circumstances could change. A forward-thinking inquisitor with sufficient resources and political capital could establish a breeding program. A tech priest could discover ancient data on blank enhancement and decide to pursue that research. A space marine chapter could decide to recruit blanks specifically to create specialized anti-demon units. Any of these developments would be alarming to the Chaos Gods, but they would not necessarily be existential threats. Individual blanks, or even small units of them, can be overwhelmed by conventional military force. Their null fields protect them from psychic attacks, but do not make them invulnerable to bullets or blades. But the real fear is in the precedent they set, the possibility they represent. If humanity could become a species of blanks, if the pariah gene could be spread throughout the entire population, the Chaos Gods would lose access to one of their primary sources of power. This is, admittedly, an unlikely scenario. The social and technical obstacles are immense, and the Imperium is far too conservative and riven by internal conflicts to pursue such a radical program. But unlikely is not the same as impossible. And for beings that operate on timescales measured in millennia, even unlikely possibilities must be considered and guarded against. The Chaos Gods know that blanks exist. They know what these individuals can do, and they know that as long as the pariah gene continues to express itself in the human population, there is a chance, however small, that it could be weaponized against them on a scale that would genuinely threaten their power. The shadow that devours, Tyranids, and the hive mind. Among the many horrors that plague the galaxy in the 42nd millennium, few are as fundamentally alien as the Tyranids. These creatures do not conquer worlds. They consume them. They do not seek glory or power or dominion. They seek only biomass, the raw organic material from which they can spawn more of their kind. They come from beyond the galactic rim, in numbers beyond counting, drawn by the psychic beacon of the Astronomicon, like moths to a flame, and wherever they pass, they leave nothing behind but barren rock, stripped of every living thing. For the Chaos Gods, the Tyranids represent a threat of a completely different nature than anything else in the galaxy. This threat is not based on opposition or resistance in any conventional sense. The Tyranids do not fight chaos out of any ideological commitment to order or hatred of the warp. They simply consume, and in their consumption, they threaten to eliminate the very thing the Chaos Gods need to survive: life itself. The key to understanding the Tyranid threat lies in a phenomenon known as the shadow in the warp. This is a psychic effect generated by the vast, alien consciousness known as the hive mind, the collective intelligence that directs all Tyranid creatures. As a Tyranid hive fleet approaches a star system, the shadow in the warp precedes it, a smothering blanket of psychic white noise that drowns out all other psychic phenomena in the area. For psychers, the arrival of the shadow in the warp is a nightmare made manifest. Their connection to the warp becomes choked, overwhelmed by the immense alien presence of the hive mind. Many psychers go insane when the shadow touches them, their minds unable to cope with the sensation of being drowned in an alien consciousness so vast and inhuman that it defies comprehension. Those who survive find their powers weakened or useless, their carefully trained abilities rendered unreliable or dangerous as the shadow disrupts their connection to the Imperium. For the Imperium, this effect is strategically devastating. It blocks astropathic communication, making it impossible for worlds under attack to call for help. It disrupts the Astronomicon, making warp travel in the vicinity of a hive fleet extremely dangerous. Worlds find themselves isolated, cut off from the wider Imperium, forced to face the Tyranid swarm with only the resources they have on hand. By the time the shadow lifts and rescue forces can arrive, it is often too late. The world has been stripped clean, its biomass absorbed into the hive fleet, which grows stronger and moves on to its next target. But the shadow in the warp has implications far beyond its tactical utility. For demons, the shadow is profoundly disturbing. These entities, composed entirely of warp energy, find the presence of the hive mind actively painful. The shadow does not negate the warp in the way that blanks or necron pylons do. Instead, it fills the warp with such an overwhelming presence that other entities cannot easily exist within its boundaries. It is the difference between a vacuum and a flood. Both can drown you, but the mechanisms are opposite. There have been recorded instances of conflicts between Tyranid forces and demonic incursions, and these battles are revealing in what they tell us about the relationship between chaos and the Great Devourer. Neither side gains sustenance from the other. Demons are beings of pure warp energy with no biomass to consume. Tyranids are material creatures that offer demons no souls to corrupt or emotional energy to feed upon. They fight not because either side has anything to gain, but simply because they occupy the same space, and neither will yield to the other. The fall of Shadowbrink provides perhaps the clearest example of this dynamic. On this world, a Tyranid invasion encountered a massive demonic incursion led by 4 greater demons, one from each of the major chaos gods. The demons found themselves frustrated at every turn. Nurgle's plagues had no effect on creatures that simply adapted around them. Khorne's warriors discovered that the blood of Tyranids provided no real satisfaction, being alien ichor rather than the blood of worthy opponents. Tzench's sorceries were smothered by the shadow in the warp. Slanesh's seductions fell on utterly deaf ears, for Tyranids have no concept of pleasure or sensation beyond the base drives of consumption and reproduction. The battle dragged on for days, with neither side able to achieve a decisive victory until the hive mind adapted its tactics, eventually overwhelming the demonic forces through sheer adaptive evolution and numerical superiority. The great unclean one that led Nurgle's forces found its psychic abilities neutralized by the shadow. The Lord of Change, unable to operate effectively in such an environment, retreated. Even the Bloodthirster, Khorne's greatest champion on the field, was eventually dragged back into the warp, still fighting but unable to overcome the Tyranid swarm. This battle revealed a troubling truth for the Chaos Gods. Tyranids cannot be defeated through corruption or seduction. They cannot be bargained with or manipulated. They have no psychology that chaos can exploit, no desires beyond the hive mind's singular imperative to consume and grow. The Tyranids are, in the most fundamental sense, immune to chaos. But the threat runs deeper than mere immunity. The Tyranids' ultimate goal, whether they consciously understand it as such or not, is to consume all life in the galaxy. Every world they strip of biomass is one less world generating the emotions and psychic energy that sustain the Chaos Gods. Every sentient species they devour is a source of power that chaos loses forever. If the Tyranids were ever to completely succeed in their campaign of consumption, If they were to reduce the galaxy to lifeless rock, the Chaos Gods would find themselves cut off from the vast majority of their sustenance. This is not a theoretical concern. The Tyranid hive fleets grow larger with each world they consume. Hive Fleet Behemoth, the first to be encountered by the Imperium in significant numbers, was eventually defeated, but only at tremendous cost. Hive Fleet Kraken was larger and more aggressive, splitting into multiple tendril fleets that attacked across a wide front. Hive Fleet Leviathan dwarfs them both, and scouts report that there are even larger hive fleets still approaching from the void beyond the galaxy. Each of these fleets represents trillions of individual organisms, from the smallest Ripper swarm to the largest hive ships. Each world they consume adds more biomass to their numbers, allowing them to spawn more creatures, to evolve new bioforms optimized for whatever challenges they encounter. The Tyranids are a self-perpetuating apocalypse, and with each passing year, they grow stronger, while the civilizations of the galaxy grow weaker from their constant defensive warfare. The Chaos Gods cannot easily fight this threat. Demonic armies can confront Tyranid swarms in battle, but these are expensive affairs that cost tremendous amounts of warp energy to sustain. Demons manifested in real space are already fighting against the pull of the Imperium, trying to drag them back. Fighting under the shadow in the warp makes this even more difficult. Chaos must expend vast resources for relatively little gain, as killing Tyranids does not generate souls for the Dark Gods to consume. And the emotional content of Tyranid deaths is negligible at best. Corrupting or controlling Tyranids is essentially impossible. There have been attempts, of course. Chaos sorcerers have tried to subvert hive mind control over individual organisms or small swarms. These attempts have, without exception, failed catastrophically. The hive mind's control over its creatures is absolute, mediated through a synaptic network that operates on principles utterly alien to how other species' nervous systems work. Even if an individual Tyranid organism could somehow be corrupted, the hive mind would simply sever its connection to that organism, leaving it to die while the rest of the swarm continues unaffected. The strategic calculations are stark. Every world the Tyranids consume is one that cannot fall to chaos. Every human turned into Tyranid biomass is one less soul for the Chaos Gods to harvest. Every Aeldari craft world destroyed by the hive fleets is a population that will never worship Slanesh or be corrupted by any other chaos power. The Tyranids are competing with chaos for the same fundamental resource, the life of the galaxy, and they are far more efficient at exploiting that resource than chaos could ever be. Moreover, the Tyranids pose a temporal threat that is unique in the galaxy. The Chaos Gods operate on timescales of millennia or longer. They can afford to be patient, to let their plans unfold over centuries, because they are essentially immortal and face few existential threats that require immediate response. But the Tyranids are expanding now, growing stronger with each passing year. Unlike most threats to chaos, which wax and wane over time, the Tyranid threat only grows more severe the longer it continues. There is even speculation among some Imperial scholars, particularly those who study the nature of the warp, that the shadow in the warp might represent something more fundamental than simply a side effect of the hive mind's presence. Some theorize that the Tyranids, or whatever distant intelligence guides them, might be deliberately working to suppress the warp, to create a galaxy where psychic phenomena cannot easily occur. If this is true, if the Tyranids are not just incidentally immune to chaos, but actively working against the warp itself, then they represent a threat on par with or exceeding that of the Necron's ancient plans. The relationship between the Tyranids and the Chaos Gods might best be described as competing predators who have no interest in each other, but are fighting over the same territory. Chaos wants to corrupt and dominate the galaxy's civilizations, to turn them into sources of worship and emotional energy. The Tyranids simply want to consume those civilizations, to break them down into their constituent biomass, and use that to spawn more Tyranids. Both goals are incompatible with the survival of galactic civilization, but they are also incompatible with each other. The Chaos Gods might despise the Imperium of man, but at least the Imperium's continued existence provides them with a vast pool of potential worshippers and emotional sustenance. A galaxy devoured by Tyranids provides nothing. This creates one of the great ironies of the 42nd millennium. The Chaos Gods are, in a very real sense, dependent on the continued existence of the civilizations they seek to corrupt. If those civilizations fall not to chaos, but to the Tyranids, chaos loses. The Dark Gods need someone to worship them, someone to feel the emotions that sustain them, someone to scheme against and corrupt. The Tyranids need only biomass, and in their consumption, they destroy everything that makes a world valuable to chaos. As the Tyranid hive fleets continue their inexorable advance, as the shadow in the warp grows wider and deeper, the Chaos Gods must confront an uncomfortable truth. For all their power, for all their ability to corrupt and destroy, they cannot stop the Great Devourer through corruption alone. They must fight, must spend precious warp energy in direct confrontation, and even then, victory is far from assured. Every Tyranid killed generates no souls for chaos. Every demon banished weakens chaos's presence in real space. It is a war of attrition that the Chaos Gods cannot easily win. The great question remains unanswered. What will happen if the Tyranids succeed? If they consume the galaxy, strip it of all life, leave nothing behind but barren worlds where once civilizations thrived, what becomes of the Chaos Gods? Do they fade slowly, starved of the emotional energy they need? Do they endure in the warp, waiting for new civilizations to rise millions of years hence? Or do they die, as completely as the civilizations the Tyranids have consumed? The Chaos Gods do not know the answer to this question, and that uncertainty, that possibility that the Great Devourer could succeed where all other foes have failed, is a source of fear that even the Dark Gods cannot ignore. The Tyranids are coming. The shadow in the warp grows darker, and for once, the forces of chaos find themselves facing an enemy that is truly their equal in single-minded purpose and unstoppable advance. Death rising, Iniad and the Inari. Among all the threats the Chaos Gods face, few are as specifically targeted as Iniad, the nascent Aeldari god of the dead. Where other threats to chaos are broad, affecting all four of the major dark gods equally, Iniad represents a singular, focused danger aimed squarely at Slaanesh. To understand this threat, we must delve into the tragic history of the Aeldari species and the desperate gambit they have undertaken to save themselves from eternal damnation. The birth of Slaanesh is one of the defining events in galactic history. The ancient Eldari civilization, at the height of its power and decadence, had become so consumed by hedonism and excess that their collective psychic emanations in the warp coalesced into a new chaos god. When Slaanesh screamed into existence, the psychic shockwave was so powerful that it created the Eye of Terror, a vast wound in real space where the warp bleeds through into the material universe. The Aeldari Empire was destroyed in an instant, with billions of souls consumed by the newborn god. But Slaanesh was not satisfied with this feast. The Dark Prince continues to claim Aeldari souls even to this day. When an Aeldari dies, their soul does not dissipate harmlessly into the warp as human souls might. Instead, it is drawn inexorably towards Slaanesh, pulled into the Chaos God's realm, where it is consumed in an eternity of torment. This is the curse that hangs over all surviving Aeldari, the knowledge that death offers no release, only damnation. The Aeldari have developed various methods to protect their souls from this fate. The Asuryani, those who escaped the fall by fleeing on craft worlds, use spirit stones, crystalline matrices that capture an Aeldari's soul at the moment of death and preserve it in the craft world's infinity circuit. The Drukari of Komoraj sustain themselves through the suffering of others, their acts of torture temporarily sating the soul thirst that Slaanesh inflicts upon them. The Exodites bind themselves to the world spirits of their planets, but all of these are stopgap measures, not true solutions. For millennia, the craft-world Aeldari have worked on what they believe to be the ultimate answer to their predicament: Inead, the god of the dead. The theory is elegant in its simplicity. As more Aeldari die and their souls are preserved in the infinity circuits of the craft worlds, the collective psychic power of these souls grows. When the last Aeldari dies and adds their soul to this collective, when every spirit stone has been filled and every craft world's infinity circuit is complete, all these souls will merge into a single entity in the warp, Inead, fully born and fully awake. This god, born from the collected souls of an entire species, would possess power comparable to, or perhaps exceeding, Slaanesh's. Inead would do battle with the Dark Prince in the warp itself, and the Aeldari believed that in this battle, Slaanesh would be destroyed, or at least severely diminished. The curse would be lifted. Aeldari souls would once again be free to reincarnate or rest in peace as they had before the fall. It was a hope that sustained the Aeldari through 10,000 years of slow decline and constant vigilance. But this plan had an obvious and devastating flaw. It required the extinction of the Aeldari species to work. Every Aeldari would have to die for Inead to be fully born. The Aeldari would save themselves by ceasing to exist, at least in the material universe. For a species that had once ruled the galaxy, that had created wonders beyond the comprehension of younger races, this was a hard prophecy to accept. Many Aeldari saw it as their inevitable fate, the price that must be paid for the sins of their ancestors. Others sought alternative paths. Chief among these seekers was Eldrad Ulthran, the high farseer of craft-world Ulthwé, and perhaps the most powerful seer alive among the Aeldari. Eldrad believed that there might be another way, a method to awaken Inead early, before all the Aeldari had to die. His plan was audacious and dangerous: to use a series of psychic rituals to jumpstart Inead's birth, to give the god enough power to at least partially manifest without requiring every Aeldari soul. The attempt was made at Port Demesnes, with Eldrad coordinating a ritual that would tap into the infinity circuits of multiple craft worlds simultaneously. But the plan was interrupted by the intervention of the Death Watch, Space Marines of the Imperium who viewed any Aeldari working of such scale as inherently dangerous and worthy of opposition. The ritual was disrupted before completion. Eldrad fled, and it seemed that his plan had failed utterly. But the ritual had succeeded more than anyone realized. It had stirred Inead in the depths of the warp, giving the nascent god a fraction of consciousness and will. And in Comarach, the dark city of the Drukhari, that consciousness found a vessel. During a gladiatorial battle in the arena known as the Crucible, Ivrain, an Aeldari who had walked many paths in her long life, was struck down. In the moment of her death, the fragment of Inead's consciousness touched her soul, and she was reborn, filled with a portion of the god's power and designated as his prophet and emissary. Thus were the Inari born. A new faction among the Aeldari united, not by Craftworld or Cabal, but by allegiance to Inead and the belief that salvation is possible without the extinction of their species. Ivrain leads them, wielding one of the legendary Kronzords, artifacts of immense power from before the fall. She is accompanied by the Vizark, who bears another of these blades, and by the Incarne, a being that seems to be an avatar or fragment of Inead itself, made manifest in real space. The Inari preach what they call the Seventh Path, an alternative to the prophecy that all Aeldari must die. They believe that by gathering all 5 of the Kronzords and bringing them together in a specific ritual, they can create a conduit that will allow Inead to fully awaken without requiring the extinction of the Aeldari. It is a desperate hope, and many among the Aeldari reject it as impossible or heretical. But thousands have flocked to Ivrain's banner, drawn from all the different Eldari factions. Craftworlds, Drukhari, Harlequins, even Corsairs and Exodites have joined the Reborn. For Slaanesh, the Inari represent a specific and terrifying threat. Unlike the broad dangers posed by other enemies of chaos, the Inari are working specifically and exclusively toward the Dark Prince's defeat. They do not seek to resist chaos generally. They seek to destroy one chaos god in particular, and they are making progress toward that goal, however slow and costly that progress might be. Ivrain's quest for the Kronzords has taken her across the galaxy and even into the Eye of Terror itself. She has recovered several of these blades already, each acquisition bringing her closer to the power needed to complete the ritual. And with each step forward, Slaanesh's concern grows. The Dark Prince has sent Shalaxi Hellbane, one of the greatest keepers of secrets ever to exist, specifically to hunt and kill Ivrain before she can complete her quest. The fact that Slaanesh has devoted one of her most powerful servants to this task speaks volumes about how seriously the Dark Prince takes the Inari threat. Slaanesh does not generally feel fear in any conventional sense, but the prospect of facing a fully awakened Inead, a god born from the collected spiritual essence of an entire species and specifically designed to battle and destroy her, is sobering even to a chaos god. The strategic implications of a successful Inari mission extend beyond just Slaanesh. If Inead were to awaken fully and succeed in destroying or severely weakening Slaanesh, it would demonstrate that chaos gods can be killed or significantly diminished by sufficiently powerful opposition. This would shatter the perception of invulnerability that surrounds the dark gods. If one chaos god can fall, others could as well. It would open up possibilities that currently seem impossible, strategies and weapons that might be developed specifically to combat individual chaos gods. Moreover, a fully awakened Inead would represent a major shift in the balance of power in the warp itself. The realm of chaos is not infinite. It has boundaries and territories, domains that the dark gods fight over constantly. If Slaanesh were defeated and Inead took her place, the nature of the warp would change fundamentally. Inead is not a chaos god. He is a god of death, of endings, of the peaceful release that comes when suffering finally ceases. His presence in the warp would be antithetical to much of what chaos represents. The Inari's appeal is not limited to the Eldari. Their message of salvation without extinction resonates with all the surviving fragments of Eldari civilization. They offer hope to a species that has lived for 10,000 years under the shadow of inevitable doom. They promise that the curse of Slaanesh can be lifted without requiring the sacrifice of every living Eldari. This message is powerful enough that it has drawn followers from every Eldari faction, creating a unified force of a kind not seen since before the fall. This unity itself is remarkable and concerning to the Chaos Gods. The Eldari have been fragmented since the fall, divided into competing factions that often fight among themselves. The Craft World. Eldari look down on the Drukhari as debased monsters. The Drukhari view the Craft World folk as weaklings clinging to a dead dream. The Harlequins follow their own mysterious paths, and the Exodites want nothing to do with any of them. But the Inari have managed to bridge these divides, at least partially, creating an organization that draws from all Eldari factions. If the Inari were to succeed, if they were to actually destroy Slaanesh and unite the Eldari species under the banner of Inead, the strategic balance of the galaxy would shift dramatically. The Eldari, freed from the soul curse and united in purpose, would once again become a major power. They possess technology and knowledge that makes the Imperium's achievements look primitive. Their psychic abilities are unmatched among organic species. Their understanding of the webway and the warp is deeper than any other race. A united Eldari civilization, no longer hobbled by the constant threat of Slaanesh, could challenge the dominance of chaos across the galaxy. The other Chaos Gods watch these developments with interest, but little direct action. They have no particular love for Slaanesh, and some might even welcome the Dark Prince's downfall if it meant they could claim her territory and followers. But they also understand that allowing Iniad to succeed would set a dangerous precedent. If one Chaos God can be destroyed by a rival deity, then all of them are potentially vulnerable to the same fate. So while they do not actively help Slaanesh resist the Inari, neither do they aid the Aeldari in their quest. The hunt for the final Kronzord has become the central focus of the Inari's efforts. 4 of the 5 blades have been recovered, but the 5th remains elusive, reportedly held within Slaaanesh's own palace in the realm of chaos. Retrieving it would require venturing into the heart of enemy territory, into a realm where reality itself bends to Slaanesh's will, where every shadow might hide a demon and every beautiful vista might be a trap designed to ensnare the unwary. The difficulty of this task cannot be overstated. The Palace of Slaanesh is not a place that can be stormed by conventional military force. It exists in the warp, where physical laws do not apply in any consistent way. Those who enter rarely leave unchanged, if they leave at all. The seductive power of Slaanesh is overwhelming in her own domain, and even the strongest-willed can find themselves succumbing to temptations they never knew they possessed. Yet Yvraine has proven resourceful and determined. She has survived encounters with Shalaxi Hellbane through a combination of skill, luck, and the direct intervention of Iniad's power. She has ventured into the Eye of Terror and returned with precious artifacts. She has united factions of Aeldari that had not worked together in millennia. If anyone can retrieve the final Kronzord and complete the ritual, it is her. The question that haunts Slaanesh is simple. What happens if she succeeds? What happens when all 5 Kronzords are united, when the 7th path reaches its culmination, when Iniad fully awakens? The answer is unknown. But the possibilities are enough to give even a Chaos God pause. Iniad might indeed be powerful enough to destroy Slaanesh, or at least diminish her to the point where she is no longer one of the 4 major Chaos Gods. The curse on the Aeldari might be lifted, allowing their souls to escape she who thirsts grasp. A new major power might arise in the warp, one hostile to chaos and aligned with order. All of these outcomes would represent a defeat for chaos, a fundamental change in the balance of power that has existed for 10,000 years. And so Slaanesh fights, sends servants to hunt Yvraine, whispers corruption to those who might betray the Inari cause, does everything possible to prevent the completion of the 7th path. The Dark Prince cannot afford to be complacent about this threat. Of all the forces arrayed against the Chaos Gods, the Inari might be the closest to actually achieving their goal. The race is on. The Inari push forward with their quest, gathering artifacts, building alliances, preparing for the final ritual. Slaanesh and her servants work to stop them, to kill Yvraine, to destroy the Kronzords, or corrupt the Inari from within. And the other Chaos Gods watch, waiting to see which way this struggle will turn, knowing that the outcome will shape the future of the galaxy for millennia to come. Unity and order, the ultimate nightmare. Beyond all the specific threats we have discussed, beyond the Emperor and the Necrons, beyond the Tyranids and the Inari, there exists a more fundamental danger to the Chaos Gods. This is not a particular enemy or weapon or species, but rather a concept, a possibility that the Dark Gods must constantly work to prevent. The possibility of order, unity, and control triumphing over chaos and division. The Chaos Gods exist because sentient beings have emotions, because civilizations generate conflict, because individual desires clash and create the psychic turbulence in the warp that sustains the Dark Gods. Everything about the way the galaxy currently functions is conducive to Chaos's continued power and influence. The Imperium is divided, suspicious, constantly at war with external threats and consumed by internal struggles. The various Xenos races fight each other as much as they fight humanity. Even when temporary alliances form, they invariably dissolve into betrayal and renewed conflict. This is the kind of galaxy where chaos thrives. But imagine a different galaxy. Imagine a civilization that had genuinely solved the problem of internal conflict, that had created structures of governance and social organization that eliminated or severely reduced the emotional turmoil that feeds the dark gods. Imagine a species that had learned to control its emotions, to channel them in productive directions, to avoid the extremes of rage, ambition, despair, and excess that chaos exploits. Imagine a galaxy united against a common enemy rather than fractured by endless internecine warfare. This was, in many ways, what the Emperor envisioned with his imperial truth. The philosophy he promoted during the Great Crusade was not simply atheism, though it included rejection of religious worship. It was a comprehensive worldview built on reason, science, and the supremacy of human achievement. It sought to condition people to approach their problems rationally, to see the universe as explicable and controllable through knowledge and effort rather than through faith or emotion. Had this philosophy taken root as the Emperor intended, the results would have been devastating for the Chaos Gods. A humanity educated in the imperial truth would not worship any gods, including the Chaos Gods. They would not see their emotional states as having cosmic significance, but rather as phenomena to be understood and managed through psychological discipline and social engineering. The very foundations of their worldview would make them resistant to the whispers of chaos, not because they were strong-willed in any conventional sense, but because they would lack the conceptual framework to understand or respond to what chaos was offering. Consider how different the Imperium would be if the Emperor's vision had been realized. Without the religious hysteria that defines the ecclesiarchy, billions of humans would not spend their lives in worship, generating psychic energy that inadvertently feeds the dark gods even when directed toward the Emperor. Without the constant paranoia and suspicion that permeates imperial culture, the division and conflict that Sench exploits would be greatly diminished. Without the grinding misery of life on most imperial worlds, the despair that sustains Nurgle would find less purchase. Without the extremes of sensation-seeking and obsession that often characterize the imperial aristocracy, Slaanesh would have fewer targets for corruption. The Imperial Webway project was another component of this vision. If humanity could travel through the Webway rather than the warp, entire populations could live their lives without ever being exposed to the Immaterium's influence. Ships would not need to carry Geller fields, and their crews would not experience the nightmares and psychological stress that comes from traveling through a dimension where demons press against the barriers of reality. Psychers would not risk possession or madness every time they used their powers. The entire relationship between humanity and the warp would be fundamentally altered, with barriers and safeguards in place that currently do not exist. The Tau Empire provides a more contemporary example of what such a civilization might look like, albeit on a much smaller scale. The Tau operate according to the philosophy of the greater good, a collectivist ideology that emphasizes the good of society over individual desires. Their culture is highly regimented, with each Tau born into a specific caste that determines their role in society. Individual ambition is channeled into serving the collective rather than personal advancement. Strong emotions are seen as unhelpful distractions from the practical work of building a better civilization. As a result, the Tau are notably resistant to chaos corruption. Their souls are dim in the warp, generating less psychic energy than humans or Aeldari. Their culture provides little fertile ground for the seeds of corruption that chaos normally plants. When chaos forces have attempted to corrupt Tau, they have generally found it difficult to make headway. The promises of power and glory that work so well on ambitious humans fall flat with Tau, who have been conditioned from birth to see such things as antithetical to the greater good. This is not to say that the Tau are immune to chaos. The events of the Fourth Sphere expansion, where a Tau fleet was trapped in the warp and apparently saved by some kind of entity born from their own collective belief, suggests that even the Tao can generate psychic phenomena given the right circumstances. But the Tao demonstrate that it is possible for a civilization to be significantly more resistant to chaos than humanity currently is, simply through cultural programming and social structure. Now imagine if such a civilization were to arise not on the fringes of the galaxy, but at its heart. Imagine if the Imperium were reformed along rational, controlled lines, with the religious zealotry stripped away and replaced by education and reason. Imagine if the various intelligent species of the galaxy were to somehow unite in a grand alliance, setting aside their differences to work toward common goals. Imagine if psychers were properly trained and regulated so that their powers could be used safely without the constant risk of demonic possession. Imagine if the entire galaxy were to embrace order and structure and purpose, rather than the chaos and division that currently defines it. Such a galaxy would be a nightmare for the dark gods. The emotions would still exist, because sentient beings will always have emotions, but they would be controlled, channeled, directed in ways that did not feed chaos. The conflict would still exist, because perfect harmony is impossible, but it would be constructive rather than destructive. The ambition, the hope, the drive to improve and grow would still be there, but it would be harnessed for productive purposes rather than devolving into the scheming and betrayal that Tzeentch feeds upon. The possibility of such a future is remote, to be clear. The Imperium is too corrupt, too divided, too far gone down the path of religious fanaticism to be reformed. The various xeno-species hate each other too much to ever truly unite. The cultural and ideological differences between the galaxy's civilizations are too profound to be bridged. But remote is not the same as impossible, and the Chaos Gods know that if circumstances were different, if a leader with sufficient vision and power were to arise, such changes could be initiated. This is one reason why the Chaos Gods worked so hard to corrupt Horus and derail the Emperor's plans. The Emperor was precisely the kind of leader who could have brought about such changes. He had the power, the vision, and the determination to reshape human civilization along the lines he desired. If the Great Crusade had been allowed to continue as planned, if the Imperial Webway had been completed, if the Imperial Truth had been given time to take root deeply enough that it could not be easily uprooted, the galaxy of the 42nd Millennium would be a very different place. The heresy was not just about stopping the Emperor specifically, it was about preserving the kind of galaxy where chaos can thrive. A galaxy fragmented and divided, where civilizations are consumed by internal struggles, where faith and emotion rule over reason and discipline, where the suffering and conflict generate constant psychic turbulence that feeds the dark gods. The Chaos Gods need the galaxy to remain in this state. They need humanity and other species to continue wallowing in the conditions that sustain chaos's power. This creates an interesting paradox. The Chaos Gods seek to corrupt and dominate the galaxy, but complete domination would actually be counterproductive to their goals. If chaos were to win completely, if every world were brought under the sway of the dark gods, the resulting civilization would be so dysfunctional that it would quickly collapse. Khorne's followers would slaughter each other. Nurgle's plagues would kill everyone. Slaaneish's worshippers would burn out in their pursuit of excess. Tzeentch's schemes would tear everything apart in their complexity. A galaxy completely dominated by chaos would be a galaxy in ruins, unable to sustain the civilizations that generate the emotions the dark gods need. So the Chaos Gods must maintain a balance. They must corrupt and destroy, but not so completely that they eliminate the sources of their power. They must spread conflict and suffering, but not to the point where all civilization collapses entirely. They must prevent unity and order from taking root, but not by imposing such complete chaos that nothing can function at all. It is a delicate equilibrium, and one that could be disrupted by any number of developments. A reformist movement within the Imperium that gained sufficient traction could begin to push back against the worst excesses of the current regime. A diplomatic breakthrough between hostile species could lead to unprecedented cooperation. A technological development that made warp travel safer or unnecessary could remove one of chaos's primary vectors of influence. A philosophical or religious movement that taught emotional control and rational thinking could inoculate populations against chaos corruption. Any of these could be the seed of a larger transformation. The chaos gods are aware of these possibilities and work constantly to prevent them. They corrupt reformers before their movements can gain critical mass. They sabotage diplomatic efforts through treachery and betrayal. They destroy or corrupt those who develop technologies that might threaten the status quo. They seduce philosophers and religious leaders, turning their teachings toward darker purposes. The eternal war between order and chaos is fought on these fronts as much as on the battlefield, through the corruption of ideas and the destruction of hope, as much as through demonic incursion and physical destruction. The greatest fear of the chaos gods is not any particular weapon or enemy, but rather the idea that things could be different. The possibility that the galaxy's civilizations could learn, could grow, could overcome the divisions and conflicts that make them vulnerable to chaos. The vision of a future where unity and order triumph over chaos and division. This is what the dark gods work to prevent, with every tool at their disposal, because if such a future were to come to pass, their power would be diminished to the point of irrelevance. It is a war of ideas, as much as a war of armies. And in that war, every act of heroism, every moment of solidarity, every example of people working together toward common goals despite their differences, is a small victory against chaos. The chaos gods understand this. They understand that what they truly fear is not any specific enemy, but rather the possibility of hope itself, the idea that the galaxy could be something other than what it is, that a better future is possible, and they will do everything in their power to ensure that such hope never becomes reality. Stagnation, the paradox of victory. Among the many ironies that define the chaos god's existence, perhaps none is more profound than this. They cannot win. Not in any permanent sense. The very conditions that would constitute victory for the forces of chaos would, in achieving that victory, eliminate the conditions necessary for chaos to continue existing. This creates a fundamental paradox at the heart of what the dark gods fear most, that they might actually succeed in their apparent goals. Consider what would happen if chaos were to achieve total domination of the galaxy. Every world brought under the sway of the dark gods, every population worshipping one or more of the ruinous powers, every institution corrupted, every government overthrown, every resistance crushed. At first glance, this would seem to be the ultimate victory, the culmination of 10,000 years of plotting and warfare. But the reality would be far more complex and far more problematic for the chaos gods themselves. A galaxy completely dominated by chaos would be a galaxy in collapse. The worshippers of Horn would turn on each other. The blood gods hunger for violence, knowing no distinction between ally and enemy. Without external foes to fight, they would wage eternal war upon themselves, and while this would certainly generate bloodshed and death, it would also lead to a gradual attrition of Horn's mortal forces. Eventually, you run out of people to kill, and when that happens, the flow of blood that sustains Horn would diminish. Nurgle's situation would be even more obviously self-limiting. The plague god's gifts spread disease and decay, and disease requires living hosts to propagate. If Nurgle's plagues were completely successful, if every living being in the galaxy succumbed to his pestilence, there would be no more hosts for the diseases to infect. The plagues would burn themselves out, consuming their environment so completely that nothing remained to sustain them. Nurgle needs life to survive so that death and decay can follow. Without that cycle, even the Plague Father would find his power diminished. Tzeentch faces perhaps the most subtle but most profound version of this problem. The architect of fate feeds on change, on the scheming and plotting and constant flux of civilizations rising and falling, plans succeeding and failing. But what happens when there is nothing left to change? If Tzeentch were to completely dominate the galaxy, if all possible plots had been executed, and all possible schemes had reached their conclusion, what would be left to feed the hunger for change? Tzeentch needs there to be something to change, some status quo to undermine, some order to transform into chaos. A galaxy already completely chaotic offers no more opportunities for the kind of transformation that sustains the changer of ways. Slanesh's paradox might be the most poignant. The Prince of Pleasure feeds on excess, on the pursuit of sensation taken to extremes beyond all reason. But sensation requires the capacity to feel, and that capacity is finite. Those who serve Slanesh long enough become jaded, burned out, unable to experience the pleasures that once drove them. They require ever more extreme experiences to achieve the same effect, spiraling into depths of depravity that eventually destroy their capacity for sensation entirely. If Slaanesh were to completely corrupt the galaxy, she would create a civilization of beings too jaded, too burned out to generate the intense sensations that sustain her power. She would consume her own food source in the act of feeding upon it. This creates a terrible irony. The Chaos Gods need the civilizations they seek to destroy. They need the Imperium to continue existing, even as they work to corrupt it. They need the various Xenos species to survive, even as they wage war against them. They need conflict and suffering, and all the conditions that make the galaxy such a terrible place to live. But they cannot allow these conditions to result in total annihilation, because then they would have nothing left to sustain themselves. In a very real sense, the Imperium of Man is one of the best things that ever happened to the Chaos Gods. A galaxy-spanning civilization of trillions of human beings, most of whom live lives of desperate struggle and suffering, all of them generating emotions that feed the dark gods, whether they worship chaos or not. The Imperium provides a constant stream of potential converts, an endless supply of souls to corrupt and harvest. Even the Imperium's worship of the Emperor inadvertently feeds chaos, as the intensity of that devotion generates psychic energy in the warp that strengthens all entities there, not just the Emperor. If the Imperium were to fall, if humanity were exterminated or completely corrupted, the Chaos Gods would lose this immense source of sustenance. They would still exist, sustained by the other species of the galaxy and by the raw psychic energy of the warp itself, but they would be diminished. This is why chaos cannot allow the complete destruction of humanity, why even as demon armies besiege Terra and heretics plot the Imperium's overthrow, there is a limit to how far the Dark Gods will push. They need humanity to survive, even if in a weakened and corrupted state. The same logic applies to the other major civilizations of the galaxy. The Aeldari, despite their dwindling numbers, provide psychic energy of a quality and intensity that few other species can match. Their suffering, particularly their fear of Slaanesh and the soul curse that hangs over them, generates emotions that feed multiple Chaos Gods. If the Aeldari were to be completely exterminated, as Slaanesh often seems to desire, that would be a significant loss of sustenance for chaos as a whole. Even the Orcs, in their own way, serve the Dark Gods' interests. These fungoid creatures are in a state of perpetual warfare, and while they do not worship chaos directly, the violence they generate feeds Khorne. Their raw, aggressive joy in battle provides emotional energy, and their numbers ensure that this energy is constant and abundant. A galaxy without Orcs would be a quieter place, less violent, less chaotic, and therefore less conducive to the Dark Gods' continued power. This necessity creates a strategic problem for the Chaos Gods. They must constantly work against their own apparent interests. They must corrupt, but not completely destroy. They must spread suffering, but not to the point of extinction. They must generate conflict, but not so much that all civilization collapses entirely. It is a balancing act that requires constant attention and adjustment, and it means that the forces of chaos can never truly go all out, can never commit completely to the destruction of their enemies. There is another aspect to this paradox that the chaos gods must fear: the possibility of stagnation. The dark gods feed on emotion, on conflict, on change and upheaval. But what if circumstances were to arise that froze the galaxy in a static state, where nothing changed, where the same conflicts played out endlessly with no resolution, where the emotional intensity that sustains chaos diminished to a low simmer that never erupted into the kind of passionate extremes that truly feed the dark gods? This is, in some ways, already beginning to happen in the Imperium. The same wars have been fought for centuries or millennia, with front lines that barely shift, despite massive expenditure of lives and resources. The same religious doctrines are endlessly repeated without evolution or development. The same technologies are used, with innovation discouraged and change viewed with suspicion. The Imperium has become, in many ways, a civilization in stasis, trapped in patterns that were established 10,000 years ago and unable or unwilling to break out of them. For Khorne, this represents a problem. Yes, there is constant warfare in the Imperium, but much of it has become ritualized, battles fought according to doctrine rather than driven by genuine rage or hatred. The blood god prefers passion, fury, the raw emotional intensity of combat entered into with absolute commitment. A warfare that has become merely professional, where soldiers fight because it is their duty rather than because they hate their enemies, provides less sustenance than warfare driven by genuine bloodlust. For Tzeentch, stagnation is even more problematic. The architect of fate needs change, innovation, evolution. A civilization that has become locked in place, that repeats the same patterns endlessly without growth or transformation, is useless to the changer of ways. The schemes and plots that Tzeentch weaves require dynamic elements, people and societies that can be manipulated and altered. A static civilization resists such manipulation simply by refusing to change, by clinging to established patterns no matter what external pressures are applied. Even Nurgle, whose domain includes decay and stagnation, needs a certain dynamism to truly thrive. Disease spreads, evolves, moves from host to host. A completely static environment where nothing ever changes would eventually result in diseases that have adapted to all available hosts and have no more room to evolve or spread. The plague. God's power comes from the spread of pestilence, not from its unchanging persistence. And Slaanesh, of course, requires novelty and intensity, the pursuit of new sensations and ever greater extremes. A civilization that has become static, that endlessly repeats the same patterns, offers no new experiences to corrupt and exploit. The Dark Prince would starve in a galaxy frozen in eternal stasis, where nothing new ever emerged and no one ever sought to transcend their current state. This creates yet another fear for the Chaos Gods, not just that they might win too completely, but that the galaxy might freeze in a state where they can neither win nor lose, where conflict continues eternally, but without the intensity and dynamism that truly feeds their power. This would be a kind of living death for the Dark Gods, maintaining their existence, but denying them the growth and satisfaction that comes from successful corruption and conquest. The implications are profound. The Chaos Gods must work to prevent both their own total victory and complete stagnation. They must maintain a level of conflict that is intense and emotionally charged without being completely destructive. They must spread corruption without eliminating the civilizations that generate the emotions they feed upon. They must generate change without allowing such radical transformation that their own position is threatened. It is an impossible balancing act, one that requires constant vigilance and adjustment. This is perhaps the most fundamental fear that the Chaos Gods face, the fear of their own success. Because success, in any real sense, would mean the end of everything that sustains them. They are trapped in an eternal cycle, condemned to pursue goals that they can never fully achieve without destroying themselves in the process. They must rage and scheme and corrupt and destroy, but always with the understanding that complete victory would be indistinguishable from complete defeat. Each god's specific fears. While we have examined threats that affect all the Chaos Gods collectively, each of the 4 major dark gods has vulnerabilities and fears specific to their nature and domain. Understanding these individual fears reveals the deeper complexities of what it means to be a Chaos God, and highlights the ways in which their fundamental natures both empower and limit them. Horn, the blood god, is the most straightforward of the 4 in his appetites and his fears. He desires blood and skulls, violence and rage, battle in its purest and most intense form. But this very simplicity contains his greatest weakness. Horn despises magic, seeing it as cowardice, as a refusal to meet enemies in honorable combat. This means that sorcery, particularly powerful sorcery, wielded by those dedicated to other gods, can be effective against Horn's forces in ways that conventional weapons might not be. More than this, Horn fears peace, not just the absence of war, but genuine peace, the kind where conflicts are resolved through negotiation and compromise rather than violence. If the galaxy's civilizations were ever to achieve lasting peace, if they were to develop mechanisms for resolving disputes without resorting to bloodshed, Horn would starve. Every diplomatic success, every conflict averted, every moment where violence is chosen against rather than embraced, weakens the blood god. Horn also fears discipline and control. The blood god thrives on berserker rage, on fury so intense that it overwhelms all reason and restraint. But soldiers who fight with discipline, who control their rage and channel it productively rather than allowing it to consume them, provide less sustenance to Khorne than warriors who surrender completely to bloodlust. The martial traditions of groups like the Space Marines, with their emphasis on discipline and controlled aggression, represent a form of warfare that feeds Khorne less effectively than the chaos of a berserker horde. There is also the matter of Khorne's eternal rivalry with Slaanesh. The blood god's hatred for the Dark Prince is absolute, and this creates a strategic vulnerability. Khorne will often act against his own interests if it means thwarting Slaanesh, diverting resources to oppose the Prince of Pleasure, even when those resources could be better used elsewhere. This rivalry can be exploited by clever opponents who understand that Khorne's forces might be more interested in fighting Slaaneshi cultists than in achieving their own objectives. Tzeentch, the architect of fate, fears stagnation and simplicity above all else. The changer of ways requires constant flux. Schemes within schemes, plans that branch into ever more complex permutations. But this means that Tzeentch is vulnerable to direct, straightforward action. The most effective way to thwart one of Tzeentch's plots is often to simply refuse to play the game, to act directly and simply, rather than trying to out-scheme the master of schemes. Tzeentch also fears the crystallization of his own plans into reality. There is a fundamental paradox at the heart of the changer of ways. He loves the process of scheming more than the achievement of any particular goal. This means that Tzeentch will often sabotage his own plans at the moment of fruition, unable to resist the urge to introduce one more complication, one more twist. This self-defeating tendency means that Tzeentch's grand schemes often collapse at the very moment they should be succeeding, undermined by the god's own nature. Knowledge and certainty are also problems for Tzeentch. The architect of fate thrives on uncertainty, on the infinite possibilities that exist when the future is unclear. But if the future were to become predictable, if cause and effect were to become so clearly understood that all outcomes could be calculated with certainty, Tzeentch would lose much of his power. The god of change needs an unpredictable universe, a deterministic one would leave him nothing to manipulate. Anti-magic and null zones represent a tactical vulnerability for Tzeentch as well. So much of the Changer of Ways power comes from sorcery that anything that negates or limits magic is particularly effective against his servants. Blanks, as we discussed earlier, are anathema to Tzeentchian forces. Necron pylons make areas effectively no-go zones for Tzeentch's demons. Even the shadow in the warp, while not specifically anti-magic, makes it difficult for Tzeentch's servants to operate effectively in areas where Tyranids are present. Nurgle, the Plague Father, has a different set of vulnerabilities. Despite being the god of disease and decay, Nurgle fears life's persistence, its stubborn refusal to surrender to entropy. When organisms adapt to his plagues, when immune systems learn to resist his diseases, when medical science finds cures for the pestilences he spreads, Nurgle's power is diminished. The very dynamism of life, its ability to evolve and overcome challenges, is antithetical to the eternal decay that Nurgle represents. Nurgle also fears hope in its purest form. The plague god offers a twisted form of hope himself, the comfort of surrender, the peace that comes from accepting death and decay. But genuine hope, the belief that things can get better, that suffering can be overcome, is poison to Nurgle. When people refuse to despair, even in the face of terrible circumstances, when they continue fighting for a better future despite overwhelming odds, they deny Nurgle the resignation and acceptance that sustains his power. Cleanliness and sterility are tactical weaknesses for Nurgle's forces. The plague, God's demons thrive in filth and decay, in environments where disease can spread easily. But sterile environments, places that have been thoroughly cleansed and maintained, make it difficult for Nurgle's gifts to take hold. This is why the medical facilities of advanced civilizations are particularly resistant to Nurgle's influence, and why his cults often target such facilities for destruction or corruption. There is also Nurgle's fear of being forgotten or rejected. The plague. Father genuinely loves his followers in his own twisted way, seeing them as his children, his family. When his followers turn away from him, when they reject his gifts or seek cures for the diseases he has blessed them with, Nurgle experiences something approaching genuine hurt. This emotional vulnerability is rare among the Chaos gods and can potentially be exploited by those who understand it. Slaanesh, the Dark Prince, has perhaps the most ironic set of fears. The god of excess and sensation fears moderation and self-control. When people master their desires rather than being mastered by them, when they seek balance rather than extremes, they become useless to Slaanesh. The Prince of Pleasure cannot corrupt those who have genuinely transcended the need for sensation, who have found contentment in simplicity. Slaanesh also fears the death of beauty and art. The Dark Prince is not just about base pleasure or crude excess, but also about the pursuit of perfection in all its forms. A universe devoid of beauty, where art and craftsmanship have been abandoned, where there is no drive toward excellence or perfection, would provide little sustenance for Slaanesh. This creates an interesting dynamic where Slaanesh both depends on and is threatened by the highest achievements of civilization. The specific threat posed by Iniad, as we discussed earlier, is Slaanesh's most immediate existential concern. But beyond this specific danger, Slaanesh fears the Eldari's capacity for self-control. Before their fall, the Eldari were able to manage their intense emotions and powerful psychic abilities without descending into excess. If the surviving Eldari were ever to fully reclaim that self-mastery, if they were to find a way to experience their emotions fully without being consumed by them, they would become largely immune to Slaanesh's corruption. Slaanesh also shares Khorne's vulnerability to discipline and structure. The Dark Prince thrives on loss of control, on people surrendering to their desires and impulses. But individuals who maintain strict discipline over themselves, who have developed the psychological tools to resist temptation and control their impulses, are difficult for Slaanesh to corrupt. Monastic traditions, martial disciplines, and psychological training that emphasize self-mastery all represent bulwarks against the Prince of Pleasure. Finally, Slaanesh fears satiation. The god needs people to always be reaching for more, to never be satisfied with what they have. But if someone were to achieve genuine contentment, if they were to find a state of being where they had everything they needed and desired nothing more, they would be effectively invisible to Slaanesh. This is a rare state in the grim darkness of the far future, but it represents an ideal that would be devastating to the Dark Prince if it were widely achieved. Each of these fears, specific to individual gods, represents a potential strategy for resisting or even combating the forces of chaos. By understanding what each god fears, what vulnerabilities are built into their very nature, the forces of order can develop tactics and strategies that exploit these weaknesses. It is not enough to simply fight against chaos with brute force. Victory, if it is possible at all, will come from understanding the enemy, from identifying their fears and vulnerabilities, and from developing approaches that target those specific weaknesses. The Great Rift and new threats. The opening of the Great Rift, the massive warp storm that now splits the galaxy in two, has changed the strategic situation for the Chaos Gods in ways both advantageous and deeply concerning. This cosmic wound, torn open during the 13th Black Crusade and the fall of Cadia, represents both a triumph and a new source of anxiety for the Dark Gods. On the surface, the Great Rift seems like an unmitigated victory for chaos. The barriers between real space and the Imperium have weakened across the galaxy, making demonic incursions easier and more frequent. Worlds that were once safely distant from chaos's influence now find themselves within reach of the warp's corruption. The Imperium has been divided, with the less defended half, dubbed Imperium Nihilus, cut off from terror and the light of the Astronomicon. It should be chaos's finest hour, but the reality is more complicated. The Great Rift is not under the complete control of any single chaos god, or even under their collective control. It is a wound in reality, yes, but wounds do not always heal in the way the one who inflicted them might prefer. The increased warp activity has had several unexpected consequences that the Chaos Gods did not fully anticipate. First, the weakening of barriers between real space and the Imperium has made it easier for other warp entities, not just the Chaos Gods and their servants, to manifest. Minor warp gods, entities that previously lacked the power to maintain a presence in real space, have found new opportunities. The Eldari gods who survived the fall in diminished form have gained new strength from the increased psychic energy. Most significantly, the Emperor's own power in the warp has surged, his consciousness blazing brighter than ever as the barriers between dimensions thin. The Emperor's response to the Great Rift has been one of the most alarming developments for the Chaos Gods. There are reports of the Emperor's will manifesting more directly than it has in millennia, of miracles performed in his name that defy rational explanation, of demons being banished by the mere presence of his power, even when no psychers or priests are present to channel it. The Emperor appears to be taking advantage of the weakened barriers to extend his influence in ways that were not possible before. Second, the creation of the Primaris Space Marines and the return of Reboot Guilliman have provided the Imperium with new resources and leadership at a critical moment. Guilliman's Indomitus Crusade has been pushing back against chaos incursions across the galaxy, reclaiming worlds that seemed lost and re-establishing imperial authority in regions that had fallen into darkness. The Primarch's tactical genius and his ability to coordinate imperial forces on a galactic scale have made him a significant thorn in Chaos's side. Third, the Great Rift has inadvertently strengthened some of the Chaos God's enemies. The Necrons, awakening in greater numbers, have found that the increased warp activity makes their technology and presence even more valuable, as they represent one of the few forces that can operate effectively in areas where the warp and real space have become dangerously intermixed. The Tyranids, drawn by the psychic beacon of the Astronomicon, and now by the even more intense psychic signature of the Great Rift itself, are approaching in even greater numbers than before. The Inari have also benefited from the changed circumstances. The psychic turmoil caused by the Great Rift has accelerated the awakening of Iniad, giving the god of the dead more power than he had before. Ivrain and her followers have used this opportunity to push forward with their quest for the Kronzords, taking advantage of the chaos to strike at targets that would have been too well defended under normal circumstances. Perhaps most concerningly for the Chaos Gods, the Great Rift has exposed fundamental tensions in their coalition. The massive warp storm was created by Abaddon's destruction of Cadia and the Blackstone Fortress he used to amplify the psychic shockwave. But while all four Chaos Gods contributed to this effort, they did not do so with equal enthusiasm or identical goals. The resulting rift does not serve all their interests equally. Khorne, for instance, has gained relatively little from the Great Rift compared to the other gods. The increased warfare is certainly to his benefit, but much of the conflict is between mortal forces and demons, or between different demon factions, and such battles do not generate the same quality of bloodshed that battles between mortal foes provide. Meanwhile, the other three gods have gained significantly more, with Siench in particular benefiting from the increased opportunities for manipulation and sorcery. This disparity has reignited the eternal rivalries between the gods, making coordinated action even more difficult than it usually is. There have been reports of battles in the Warp, where one god's demons have actively interfered with another god's plans regarding the Great Rift, sabotaging incursions or redirecting warp storms to serve their own purposes rather than any collective goal. The Great Rift has also made it harder for the Chaos Gods to control their own followers in real space. With the barriers weakened, demonic possession has become more common, but so has uncontrolled mutation and warp contamination. Chaos cults that might have remained hidden for years, slowly gathering strength, now find themselves transforming or being discovered far earlier than planned. The increased chaos activity has put the entire galaxy on higher alert, making subtle corruption more difficult even as blatant corruption becomes easier. Moreover, the Great Rift has attracted attention from forces outside the galaxy. There are disturbing reports reaching Imperial authorities of strange signals from beyond the galactic rim, of fleets or entities that seem to be investigating the massive warp storm from a distance. If these reports are accurate, if the Great Rift has indeed drawn the attention of powers that exist beyond the Milky Way, the implications could be staggering. The Chaos Gods have ruled the warp within this galaxy for so long that they may have forgotten that the universe is larger than just this one galaxy, and that other entities of similar or greater power might exist elsewhere. The emergence of new demon types and warp entities is another concerning development. The psychic turbulence of the Great Rift has given rise to demons and warp creatures that do not fit neatly into the categories defined by the four major chaos gods. These entities might serve chaos broadly, but they are not necessarily loyal to any particular god. They represent wild, uncontrolled warp energy given form, and they answer to no master but their own nature. Among these new entities, the demon engine, known as Vashtor, has emerged as a particularly notable example. This being, sometimes called the Archiphane, represents a domain that none of the traditional four gods claim: technology, machinery, and the fusion of flesh with metal. Vashtor's emergence suggests that the increased warp activity is allowing new aspects of sentient existence to coalesce into warp entities, potentially threatening the four major gods' collective monopoly on chaos worship. If Vashtor or similar entities were to gain enough power and followers to rival the traditional four, the balance of power in the warp could shift dramatically. The Chaos Gods are used to being the dominant forces in the Imperium, with only each other as true rivals. The emergence of new major warp powers would complicate their eternal game in ways they might not be prepared for. The Chaos Gods have also discovered that the Great Rift, while providing opportunities, has made certain operations more difficult. The sheer scale of the warp storm makes navigation and communication challenging even for demonic forces. Coordinating large-scale invasions across the rift is complicated by the unpredictable nature of time and space within it. A force that enters the rift might emerge years earlier or later than intended, making strategic planning extremely difficult. Furthermore, the Imperium's response to the Great Rift has included the activation or rediscovery of ancient technologies that were previously thought lost. Necron pylons have been activated in several key systems, creating safe corridors through the rift. The discovery of what is apparently ancient human technology from the Dark Age, capable of stabilizing real space even in the face of massive warp storms, has provided the Imperium with tools it did not previously possess. Each of these developments represents a potential long-term threat to Chaos's expanded influence. The Great Rift has revealed to the Chaos Gods that while they are powerful, they are not as in control of events as they believed. The wound they tore in reality has developed in ways they did not fully predict, and the responses of their enemies have been more effective than anticipated. The Rift was supposed to herald a new age of Chaos dominance, but instead, it has sparked a galaxy-wide conflict in which the outcome is far from certain. Most troubling of all, perhaps, is the fear that the Great Rift might eventually heal or be sealed. If the forces of order were to find a way to close or contain the rift, if they could restore the barriers between real space and the Imperium to something approaching their pre-rift strength, all the gains Chaos has made would be reversed. The Chaos Gods would find themselves pushed back, their influence diminished, their followers isolated and vulnerable. This fear is not baseless. There are those within the Imperium and beyond who are working on exactly such solutions. Necron cryptechs study the rift with the goal of finding ways to close it. Eldari farseers have seen possible futures where the rift is sealed. Even the Emperor himself, from his throne on Terra, may be working on methods to restore the barriers that once kept Chaos at bay. The Great Rift might represent Chaos's greatest triumph in millennia, but it could also be temporary, a wound that will eventually heal if the forces of order have anything to say about it. Conclusion. We have journeyed deep into the darkness to uncover truths that few dare to speak. We have examined the vulnerabilities of beings that most consider to be invincible. We have seen that even the Chaos Gods, those terrible entities that corrupt worlds with a whisper and command demon legions beyond counting, know fear. They face threats that challenge their very existence, enemies they cannot easily corrupt or defeat, possibilities that could see their power diminished or even destroyed. From the Emperor of Mankind, sitting entombed on the golden throne, yet still blazing like a psychic sun in the warp, to the soulless Necrons awakening from their millions-years slumber, with technologies that can seal off the Immaterium itself. From the Tyranids, those consumers of worlds whose shadow in the warp smothers psychic phenomena and threatens to devour all life that sustains chaos, to the Inari, who work toward the awakening of a god specifically designed to destroy Slaanesh. Each of these threats represents a genuine danger to the dark gods, but perhaps the greatest threats to chaos are not the specific enemies or weapons we have discussed, but rather the concepts they represent. Unity, order, hope. The possibility that the galaxy's civilizations could overcome their differences, could work together toward common goals, could resist the whispers of the dark gods through discipline and reason rather than through constant vigilance and violence. The vision of a future where strong emotions are understood and controlled rather than being allowed to run wild, where psychic abilities are properly trained and regulated, where the very foundations of civilization make corruption difficult rather than inevitable. The Chaos Gods are trapped by their own nature. They are monomaniacal, unable to be anything other than what they are. They cannot cooperate for long without betraying each other. They cannot achieve complete victory without eliminating the sources of their own power. They cannot control their own followers once corruption reaches a certain point. They need the civilizations they corrupt to survive. Even as they work toward those civilizations' destruction, They are caught in an eternal paradox, pursuing goals that they can never fully achieve without destroying themselves in the process. This is what gives hope to those who fight against chaos. The dark gods are powerful, yes, but they are not omnipotent. They have limitations, vulnerabilities, fears. They can be resisted, fought, perhaps even defeated by enemies who understand their nature and exploit their weaknesses. Every act of heroism, every moment of unity, every example of people choosing order over chaos, discipline over indulgence, hope over despair, weakens the dark gods and strengthens the forces of order. The eternal war between chaos and civilization continues in the 42nd millennium with no clear victor. The opening of the Great Rift has changed the strategic situation, but it has not decided the ultimate outcome. The Imperium Nihilus fights on in darkness, cut off from terror but unbowed. The returned Primarch Roboute Guilliman leads the Indomitus crusade to reclaim lost worlds. The Necrons awaken to pursue their ancient vendetta against all things of the warp. The Tyranids advance, consuming everything in their path. The Inari seek the final Kronzord that will allow Yniad to fully awaken. And through it all, the Emperor watches from his golden throne, his power growing with each passing year, each new prayer, each act of devotion from the countless trillions who worship him. Whether he is becoming a new god, whether he has some final plan that will only be revealed in humanity's darkest hour, whether he is simply holding the line until someone or something else can deliver the decisive blow against chaos, no one knows for certain. But his presence alone, that blazing psychic beacon in the warp, is enough to give the Chaos Gods pause. The story of what the Chaos Gods fear is ultimately the story of hope in a hopeless universe. In the grim darkness of the far future, where there is supposedly only war, the very fact that the Dark Gods have fears means that they are not invincible. It means that the war can be won, that a better future is possible, that the endless suffering and corruption that defines the current age is not inevitable. Every soldier who stands against demon hordes, every psyker who resists corruption, every citizen who maintains their faith and humanity in the face of horrors that would break lesser spirits, every leader who chooses to unite rather than divide, all of these are small victories against chaos. And small victories, accumulated over time, can eventually lead to something greater. The forces of order do not need to destroy the Chaos Gods completely. They need only to push them back, to limit their influence, to create spaces where civilization can flourish without constant threat of corruption. This is the secret that the Chaos Gods fear most, that their dominion is not eternal, that their power is not absolute, that for all their terrible might, they can be resisted and eventually defeated. They know that as long as mortals continue to fight, continue to hope, continue to choose light over darkness and order over chaos, the outcome of the eternal war remains uncertain. The question that remains is whether the forces of order have the strength, the unity, and the wisdom to exploit the vulnerabilities we have discussed. Can the Imperium be reformed and unified under Guilliman's leadership? Can the various intelligent species of the galaxy overcome their hatred and work together against their common enemy? Can the Necrons' pylon technology be combined with the Imperium's resources to create safe zones where chaos cannot reach? Can the Inari succeed in awakening Yniad and striking the first real blow against one of the major Chaos Gods? Can humanity's faith in the Emperor finally coalesce into something that can stand equal to the Dark Gods in the warp? These questions remain unanswered, and perhaps they cannot be answered in any definitive way. The future of the galaxy is unwritten, shaped by billions of individual choices and actions, by the clash of massive forces beyond mortal comprehension, by the eternal struggle between order and entropy, between hope and despair, between the material universe and the nightmare realm of the warp. But one thing is certain: the Chaos Gods are not invincible. They fear, And in that fear lies the seed of their potential defeat. The eternal war continues, and its outcome is far from certain. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is war, yes, but there is also hope. And as long as hope endures, chaos cannot claim complete victory. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive into the shadows, into the fears that plague even gods. If you enjoyed this exploration of Warhammer 40,000 lore, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Your support helps me continue to create content that delves into the darkest corners of the 41st millennium, uncovering the secrets that most would prefer remain hidden. Until next time, may the Emperor protect you, and may you never forget that even in the darkest night, the light of hope still burns.
I hope you guys enjoyed the story. Make sure to hit the subscribe, like, share button, whatever you want. Give me some feedback if there's any. And yeah, sleep well.